So most of y'all watched, or many of y'all watched the Doug Hubbard. Very different view of risk. I really like his approach. I like what he says about intuition because I think it's absolutely true. People say intuition is someone basing their decisions on experience. And if you remember Kahneman, we don't base anything on experience. We base everything on our memory of experience. And our memory is a collection of memories in order to maximize our egos. It's not an unbiased, it's a quite extensively biased. But there's a lot of people that they just roll their eyes at you, it's my intuition, it's my experience and all this kind of stuff. And Doug Hubbard's going to ask, well, show me the evidence that your intuition is better than random chance. And there's no evidence. But they remember that it works really well. Why? Because they remember everything that they did well. That's just the way it is. I remember my experience at UTSA. Wow, it was great. I remember all the good decisions I made. I don't remember all the bad ones, but there's a lot of them. I know there's a lot of them, but I don't remember them. But so I want to go back to Kahneman, but just real quickly, the question is, how do you get around this bias? And I think part of it's to whom you listen to. So one thing I think of is we know our egos are really involved, so we tend to want to listen to people that agree with us. So how do you get out of that trap? So what I do is I say, okay, I want to listen to someone that's going to make me more knowledgeable, it's going to improve my decisions. So there's three criteria, really two, but the two criteria I really focus in on it. Are they knowledgeable? Are they skilled and knowledgeable? I think we listen to a lot of people that they sound smart, they sound confident, so we assume they know what they're talking about without any evidence at all. So are they skilled? Are they knowledgeable? And then the second one is, what is their incentive to be correct? I want to listen to people that if they're wrong, it costs them a lot. They have a strong incentive to be right and to change their opinion if they're not right. So those are the two criteria I'm looking for. I don't want people that are talking on TV, if they're wrong, everybody forgets and don't think about it. I want people that, well, when they're wrong, they're going to lose a lot of money or reputation's going to crash. The third one I like that I've started doing a lot more is to specifically search out people that disagree or on the other side of the argument. If I can find that makes it much stronger. So if you look at stuff like global warming, you got Trump, you got AOC, you got Gore. These are people that, first of all, I'm not sure how knowledgeable Trump and AOC are on global science. I don't know what their background is. I don't think it's that strong, but I don't know for sure. Since I don't know for sure, I'm going to kick it out. I know what their incentives are. I know Trump, to say anything positive about we need to fix global warming is going to mess up his clientele. Same thing with AOC, same thing with Greta, whatever her name is. Same thing with Gore. I'm not really sure what he seems more knowledgeable maybe than the others, but I think he also has incentives.
The world was going to end in like 2014 though.
What?
Didn't he say the world was going to end in like 2014?
Well, you can certainly critique their forecasting ability. But I do think Gore is in a position, Greta as well is in a position that there's no way they can go on the other side now because they've got so much invested in it. I don't think it's because they're intentionally going to lie. I just think their brains will not allow them to go. So how do you get yourself so you're never in that position? Unfortunately, I got Limbaugh up there. So sorry, he passed away, so he doesn't have any position now. The CDC, the WHO, the thing that bothers me, the CDC is some of their numbers on obesity seem so ridiculous to me. I saw one study, they said 100% of Americans will be obese in 50 years. I'm thinking this seems ridiculous. That doesn't make sense to me. But they have an incentive to say that. Why? Because that's where their funding comes from Congress. They want us to be out of shape. My doctor had me overweight. I was like, I'm overweight. I don't think I can, my clothes barely fit as is. It didn't make sense to me, but that's what the CDC says. And CDC's come up with all these things that make us look as terribly unhealthy. I saw this one TV show, they were talking to these teenagers about the problem with obesity in America, and these kids were so frantically worried about it. I think the average body mass or whatever fat content was like 2% in that room. It was just like all these athletic teenagers, and they're all like, oh my word, what am I gonna do? So yeah, is health an issue in the US? Yeah, it definitely is. But can you trust the CDC with the numbers? I don't know about the WHO. I don't know what their incentives are. So I tend that if I don't know, I'm just real leery of them, with all of these people on all sides. So whom do I listen to? So you may not agree with me here, but I love Swiss Re. Y'all, those are my P&C class. Now I love for Swiss Re. Definitely very knowledgeable. They have a lot of engineers, meteorologists, actuaries. I certainly like that. They also are reinsurers. So if they're wrong, they lose billions of dollars. So from that standpoint, I say, okay, this is a group I'm going to listen to. They have an incentive to be right. And if they're wrong, they have an incentive to change their opinion. So RMS, AIR, these stuff from RMS and AIR have gotten a lot of bad press for there being some really big weaknesses in their models. But at the same time, they're very knowledgeable to have an incentive to fix those problems. But that's just my criteria. Do they know what they're talking about? And then what happens to them if they're wrong? If I can get those two pieces, then I'm saying, okay, I'm willing to listen to you and hear you out. And then if you disagree with me, even better. I keep begging students to set up a debate between me and another professor on any of these topics I disagree with. I had a student today tell me that she has a class that still teaches the Boston Consulting Group, cows and cash cows and dogs and stars. I was like, I thought that died like 20 years ago, but says, I'll debate someone on that in public. I don't think that works at all. I think it's pretty ridiculous, but I'll debate it. Yeah, if I make that, if the other professor makes a fool of me, even the better, because I'm going to definitely remember it and have learned from the situation. Yeah, let's go for it. But anyway, y'all have anything to add to that? Y'all probably have some experience that. To whom do you listen? Do you have relatives that only listen to Fox and only listen to MSNBC? And how do you? I was watching a guy listening to these family members in Ukraine calling their family in Russia, and the conversations, y'all have seen those, the conversations they're having, how frustrating it is. It's like, oh, it's all a lie. Well, there's a tank outside my living room, but okay, maybe there's some truth to it. I can take a picture of it. Oh, you made that up. So my main thing is, I don't want to solve the world's problems. I want to just make sure what I'm consuming is changing me, that I'm learning. So that's why I think Annie Duke, she says, change your ego not to being right, change your ego to learning. You learn something, you're changing your mind. Actually incentivize yourself to change your mind. As I like to say, a good book is one that's written well. A great book is one that's written well and changes my opinion on something that I've held for 20 or 30 years. That's a great book. If I can find one like that, that's the best. So nothing else to add. Well, as y'all learn through your careers, email me this. So let's talk about good old Kahneman. He's the one that started all this. He and Tversky, Nobel Prize winner. Y'all see what I meant about his Nobel Prize speech? It's a fairly empty room, pretty dry speech. And he had a few places that were really hard to follow because he did have some typos. You would think a Nobel Prize speech would be a packed room and it'd be real exciting presentation, but he's not a particularly kind of effervescent type of presenter. He's just, here's the facts. So he's an imperialist. He's out there studying certain theories. It's some of the things that he does are pretty interesting. What's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle? As soon as you study something, it changes it, whatever it is. I'm not a scientist, but you have to kind of wonder about some of these studies if they actually are not creating their own kind of special world. Here's the videos he watched. So he's famous for two things: bounded rationality and then prospect theory. Prospect theory is more of the risk management piece, but I think bounded rationality is pretty important here as well. We can't make perfect decisions. There is no such thing as optimization because we don't have time. You can't go to HEB and you're going to optimize your decision on which sponge to buy or which cracker to buy or which cereal to buy. You don't have time to sit there and look at all the boxes, look at the prices, set up an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, you could do it, sit there and say, okay, now I got my Cheerios. now I'm going to do my fruit roll-ups. You don't have time, so you're going to have to make satisfying decisions. Something that is good enough for what you got to do, but optimal. I remember some of y'all heard this story before, but we were working on a project at UTSA, and the head of the statistics department at Princeton was on this project, and he for some reason thought I was important. He didn't know I was just this peon analyst. So this guy was calling me at least once a month, sometimes every 2 weeks. And boy, I was taking advantage of that as much as I could. I think he would have, if he'd known who I was, he would have stopped calling. Real nice guy, real smart guy. But this is the discussion I have with him, is optimization. I'm having so much trouble building these models for optimization, because as soon as I run the model, I've got a result, but everything's changed. I got new interest rates. I got all this kind of stuff. So, and his answer was, forget optimizing. It's impossible. The goal is not optimization. The goal is improvement. Figure out where you are and go better, and then start over again, start over again. You're just trying to move to a different level each time. And that's somewhat where we are. We can't look at all this data. There's just way too much data. So we got to find some decision that's good enough. I do think there are some solutions that require a lot more time, because they're a satisfying solution for which cereal you buy is not nearly as important as a satisfying decision of whom you marry. Would you agree? Or how many kids you have? Some decisions require a whole lot. I don't know how much time some of my friends spent on how many kids they have. It was a disaster after 2, and they had another 3, thinking, 2 was horrible, 3 would probably be a lot better. I don't get that logic. I watch Dr. Phil sometimes, and it's like, I can't believe these people are making these decisions. They're making these decisions with less thought than I'm making my cereal decisions, and their lives are a disaster, and I don't understand it. So we probably should really seek out much more information, but we can't. Our brain has limits. We can't really look at everything. But he says there are 2 types of thinking: the fast, the slow. Thinking Fast and Slow is the name of his book. The fast is the intuitive. The fast works really well in certain situations, especially with that false negative situation. Is there a cat in the grass? You're probably better off making a fast decision that's going to save your life, even though there's maybe 90% chance there's nothing there. And then the slow, analytical, rational decision. It's with the fast thinking that we make the most bias and errors in our decisions and make the worst decisions. And yet we make those decisions quite frequently. He talks a lot about changes in states. I think that's one of the most important things he comes up with, is our brains don't look at states. Our brains look at changes in states, and the changes in states. That's why I say it's the key to happiness is to set up more changes, because that's what your memory, so much of this happiness of life is memory, and your memory is better with changes. So I actually think you should move. I have students like, I got to work in San Antonio. My family's here and all this. Like, no, you need to move. You really need to move. You need to move to another city. The mistake I made was living here my whole life. I should have moved to different cities. Fortunately, where I was working, I was moving jobs pretty regularly, so I was getting different apartments. But I think you should move. I've never had any move in a job where I didn't think, wow, I'm really glad I did that. You just need to move different cities, move to different places, different companies. Because your brain can then remember your life better, but also it's those changes, each one of those is actually creating more happiness. And this gets close to his prospect theory. We tend to overstate losses and understate gains because we don't think in states, we think in changes. This is the perfect example here. Susie and Mike started with 100,000. 1 year later, Susie had 105, Mike had 450. The second year, Susie had 110, Mike had 125. So economic theory says who's happy, tells you which person's happier. Mike and Susie. Who's happier based on economic theory? Mike's happier. Why is Mike happier? And who should be happier? Mike. Who is happier? Susie. She shouldn't be. She's $15,000 poorer. But why is Mike the happy one? Because he had 450, now he's 125. That's the way our brains think. So how do you handle that? Get around that? I don't know. But our whole system set up, thinking Mike's the happier person. But it's the change in the state that makes a difference. And again, that's why you should buy the $20,000 car, $1,000 car, $30,000 car, $40,000 car. Don't jump from 20 to 80, because there's not that much joy going up to 80, but boy, you're gonna have a lot of pain if you got to jump back to 30 when you lose your job. So you're much better spreading it out. You get more points of happiness, and you have less regret if you have to move back down. The mental accounting, we tend to segregate things in very illogical ways. So yeah, there's so many examples of that. I was working with a lady at USAA. She was doing my insurance. I was doing her 401k plan, and she was all stressed about it. But her pension plan was worth probably $500 million. Her 401k was only $40,000. She's always like, almost doesn't even matter. Just stick it all in stocks because you got 40,000 bucks. It's just not that important. But she was so focused. I got to focus on my 401k. It's like, no. The best investment decision you made was working for USAA with a good pension plan that doesn't exist anymore, but you have one. Where would she be today if all they had was a 401k plan? She would not have been able to retire at all, but fortunately she had that pension plan. But she was focused on this. They were the same. They weren't. One was 500,000, one was 40,000. Two very different things. We're more sensitive to prospective loss and the probable outcome. If we can imagine it, it's what our brains can picture. This is why they found some really interesting studies of asking people, how much would you pay for airline insurance? And they get the number, and then go talk to another group. How much would you pay for terrorism insurance that covers you in an airplane crash? And which would people pay more for? The first one covers you for any airplane crash, including terrorism. The second one only covers you for an airplane crash related to terrorism. Which do people pay more for? The second one. Why? Because they could picture that. You gave them something very specific to think about. Hyperbolic discounting. This is the thing that Jeremy Grantham is so upset about, is we tend to use really high discount rates. Jeremy Grantham's been asking if finance can even work given global warming, because people say 100 years from now the world ends, but hey, you discount that at a high enough discount rate, it's not that big of a deal, plus I'll be dead then anyway. And he's like, we can't be using these discount rates that are affecting future people. We need to have to take them in consideration. And this one is the confusing part of his presentation, but I think it's really, really interesting because of how problems come to us. We're much better with averages than we are with sums. Our brains can just much more quickly do that. And so we tend to use averages for our quick thinking, even when sums make more sense. So here's the example I gave of the two sets of dishes, 24 and 40. Obviously, set B is the more valuable one, but two of these are broken. All of these are in good condition. So you essentially have 38 pieces versus 24 pieces. Which one did you pay more for? Well, people look at it and they're looking at the average value of the dishes. Well, they should be summing them up. And so people are putting more value on set A than set B. He gives other examples, and you can certainly see this in finance. We tend to make this mistake. And then this one, boy, every time I watch it, I have to stop the video and think about it. So I'm not going to try to see if my mind, anybody remember this one and can explain it? This small sample, I think Doug Hubbard talked a little bit about this. I like what Doug Hubbard said is the importance of small samples. That this idea that something's really hard to measure, we might as well not even bother unless we can get a really large sample. And he said, what? Sometimes you only, a little sample because of the curve, a little sample can actually reduce risk far more than having many, many samples, because you have something to work with. And that's kind of similar, I think, what he's talking about here. So here's his slides on that. You can read through that. I can't remember which slide had the typo on it. I don't think it was this one. But again, it's the way our brains work. I don't know why we can do certain things faster in our brains than others. It might have to do with the way we're taught math, or it may just be the way the math itself is. Which category belong in? We tend to, we hear something, we just start thinking automatically because of biases that we have. This to me gets back to Boy, I'm not an expert on this, but I really believe in it. Are y'all Bayesian logic experts? Anyone in here? How many of y'all do Bayesian logic? I think we should have a class on Bayesian logic for finance majors. And there's no one in here. Did the actuaries have to take? What logic classes did y'all take? I took 6 hours of logic. Probably the 6 best hours I took undergraduate.
Using stats 3.
Stats 3, they did Bayesian logic there. Do you remember any of it? I think it's really powerful. Every time I hear it in a podcast, like, oh yeah, boy, that's a powerful way to think about it. And then I forget it because we didn't use it. But I was thinking, man, if I were to think like this, I would make much better decisions, because it does shield a flaw in the way our mind tends to. One little piece of information, we go off on this new tangent versus sitting back and say, okay, what was the base? What did we start with as our base? Does this little information really radically change? Are we letting ourselves be drug off into no man's land? So I'd recommend, I try to find a good book, but there aren't any good books that are readable. They're more textbooky. I did love my logics class, though. I do highly recommend that you take logic. And I don't know if UTSA has a good logics department. I don't think it really matters. I think we're all probably taught about the same. It's pretty straightforward stuff. But there's a lot of finance that is very closely related to logic. And then, our experience with time and pain, I thought this was pretty interesting. The fact that they're actually running these experiments on actual live people seems a little upsetting to me, but it is interesting that you have someone in this medical procedure, and you could just stop it, but the person's be better off if you extend it and let the pain come down over time, so that their memory of it is that last part that wasn't that painful, and they leave. Is that what you want doctors to do? So you could go home now, but we're going to keep you here another hour in pain, but it would be less pain because you'll feel better about it. What would you tell your doctor that said that? It's like, no, I think I'll go home now and I'll never come back again. Right, and then prospect theory. I can never remember prospect theory. I need to write it down somewhere. I don't know why I can't remember the word prospect, but prospect theory is how we view gains and losses. We feel the joy of pain of gains much less than we feel the pain of losses, and that has a huge impact on how we make decisions. It also has a huge impact on democracies and how democracies make decisions, because the people that are losing are going to fight a whole lot harder to keep what they have than the people who are gaining are going to fight to get that gain. So it works really well politically. If you can convince people they're losing something, you've got a political power force. If all you're doing is convincing people they'll be better off with this decision, they're like, yeah, that's fine, see if you can get it done, and they're not going to fight whatsoever. So it's a good political base. So we're asymmetric in losses and gain perspectives. The pain of losing $1,000 could be compensated by the pleasure of earning $2,000. So it's pretty skewed. Peyton, I can't remember that thing you sent me. What was that?
Oh, the coin flip thing.
Yeah, I completely read it incorrectly.
So it's like you have the opportunity to flip a coin, or you could flip the coin, and if you pick it right, you get $1 billion. But if you walk away, you get $1 million. So it's like
Okay.
what you do.
Yeah, so $1 million for sure, or $1 billion flip. I think a lot of people would probably flip the coin. Chance for the $1 billion. It depends how desperate they are for $1 million. I restated it in a loss position. You lose $1 million if you get one, but you get $5 billion if you get ahead. So that's a little bit more here. That is kind of bad because a lot of people don't have $1 million, but if you're a college student with debt, you might as well go with the bet, because what are you gonna do? Sue me for $1 million. I don't have it, take me to court. But what if it's $100? Well, I'd have to do the math. $100 or $100,000, would you do that? Heads, you get $100,000. If you walk away, I'll give you $100. Y'all would probably do that bet. What about 10,000 and $1 million? At what point do you say, well, okay, that's getting a little. If you could do that bet 20 times in a row, obviously then you would do it. You only have to hit the $1 billion once in that case, and you don't pay the $1 million until the game's over, right? So you can just say, hey, yeah, flip again. But the way our minds think in these situations has a big impact. And I'm not sure we're always all that sure. 1,000 versus 2,000, if it was $1 versus $2, that, it depends on the severity as well. But we are loss averse. And that's the reason insurance works. So talking about insurance class, insurance is a losing proposition. When you buy insurance, you're expected to lose money because the insurance company collects $100 and on average they pay out $70. So when you buy insurance, you're expected to lose on average 30%. How many of y'all enter into an investment where you're guaranteed on average, you're on average going to lose 30%? Does that sound like a rational investment to make? Why are you doing it? Because every once in a while, you're going to lose 20,000 that insurance is going to pay. I've gone my whole life without, much of an insurance claim. On my auto insurance, I've never had an auto insurance claim that I've filed. I've had 3 people hit me and they paid, but I have never paid. So my whole life I've been paying for insurance and I've gotten nothing back for it. Why do I do that? Who knows? But that's what we do on insurance. Why? Because we're loss averse. We'd rather have the expected loss of the insurance premium than that unexpected loss of a $20,000, $30,000 claim. So insurance wouldn't work if this weren't the case. So most utility theories tend to be a little bit more symmetrical. We're risk averse in gain situations, but not only that, we tend to be risk seeking in loss situations, which means, and one thing he's discovered, I didn't put it in here, but it's pretty interesting. The way you phrase a question, you can change people's positions. Whether you phrase it as a gain or a loss, there's several questions that they ask, and the way they phrase it, if you look at the question, it's the exact same question both times, but they word it differently, and they'll get 60% choosing A in this one, and they'll get 60% choosing B in this one, and you look at them and say, it's the exact same thing. But in one case, he'll say, if you choose this, we know for sure this many people are going to die. On this one, they say, hey, if you choose this, we can save this many people. And that's just the way they word it. The exact same numbers, they change the wording. That tells you we're making bad decisions because it's the same data and we're changing our decision based on how they worded it. That's why that book, and I'm not a big fan of this book, so I'm not recommending it. Book Nudge. Have any of y'all read this book before? Another Nobel Prize winner, Richard Thaler. Richard Thaler, I've heard him called the father of behavioral finance or behavioral economics. Have any of y'all read this book? He calls it, it may be in here, paternalistic liberalism or something like that. But governments, rather than governments coercing us to do something, they just reword things. So instead of having you opt in to donating your kidneys or your organs, you have to opt out. That makes sense, doesn't it? If you have to opt in, very few people opt in, but you tell people, hey, if you don't want to give your organs, then you have to opt out. Yeah, a lot more people do that. They found that with 401k plans. If you automatically enroll people in 401k plans, they'll tend to stay in it. They have to enroll themselves. They don't enroll. So, and then you have the big debate. We had this at USA. If you auto enroll people in 401ks, what do you stick them into? You put them in some real low risk fixed fund, or do you put them in their target retirement fund? I think we decided to put them in their target fund. So if they're 22, we're going to put them in a high stock fund. But then what if the stock market crashes right after we do that and they lose 40% of their money? They're going to come sue us. You have to think through those things. But there are more and more people saying, well, if the human brain makes a decision based how we word it, then we need to manipulate people and how we word things to get them to do things differently. The problem with that phrase to me is the we, because the we is the government. The government is saying, hey, they're better off doing A than B, so we need to, and like, well, how do you know that? I don't know if I trust you. You got $30 trillion in debt and you're spending more. I'm not sure you're the best decision maker out there, but okay. So we tend to be risk seeking. I think I saw some statistics on divorces. When one spouse is very wealthy and the other one's not the wealthy one, the not wealthy one wants to settle. What does the wealthy one want to do? He or she's going to fight to the end. Why? because he or she's in a losing position. The other one's got it made. So they're gonna, hey, I'm willing to risk it. I'll lose it a lot more if I can get out of this without losing that much. I don't know if that was the case with Bezos. What was his divorce like? Or Bill Gates, what was his like? I know his wife's giving a lot of money away now.
One of them had prenups, so probably would pay.
Well, I don't think Bill Gates needed a prenup when he got married. He
Oh,
was,
yeah, that's why.
he was pretty poor then, wasn't
That's
he?
why he had they both
Yeah.
their wives whenever young.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't, if you thought that far ahead. And I don't know who would marry someone who wants to sign a prenup anyway. It's like when we get married, I mean, when we get divorced, if we get divorced. All right. So we're loss averse when with what we possess. We're risk seeking once we have lost. So this is the thing I think about with airlines. I don't know if this would work, but I've been on planes where they're begging someone to take a later flight. Y'all seen that, haven't you? And I think they could change the way they do this. So they're begging people to give up their flight. They're asking someone to give up something they possess. What does Kahneman say? We're going to fight to the death on stuff we possess. So I think if airlines thought about it differently, let's give someone something. And if they don't react in 20 minutes, they're going to lose it. So let's text someone and say, hey, you just won a $300 travel voucher. All you have to do is take a little bit later flight. If you don't respond in 20 minutes, you're going to lose that. Would that change people's perspective at all? I mean, if you think about it, you got people here that are probably on vacation. Maybe they make, $50 a day. They just been offered a $400 travel voucher to delay their trip 2 hours. Logically, they should be taking the $400, shouldn't they? But they're not. Why? Because they value that 2 hours trip leaving now. Is there a way you could reword it so that they would say, hey, I'm losing something. I better run up there before someone else. And then you get the slice. You got 1 minute. We're about to give it to somebody else. Would that change the? I don't know. I don't know if airlines have played with that or tried that at all. But is there some way you can take advantage of this? So, and then the experience versus memory. We talked some about that. I do think that's really, really important to know. He points out the memory is not a database. It's not collecting facts and experiences. It's a storyteller. It's a storyteller about our lives, and we want it to be interesting and encouraging and making us look smart and great. So it's a storyteller, and we have to just realize that we're going to remember things in a way that makes the story as good as possible. We forget most of our experiences. I mean, by most, I mean 90-something%. A friend of mine posted something on Facebook from 15 years ago. I'm in this picture. I was like, I have no memory of standing there wearing that horrible shirt I was wearing. Maybe that's why I forgot about it. But yeah, it's like I don't even know what we were doing. So we forget just about everything. And we talk about the 2-week vacation. You don't go on vacation for the experience. You go on vacation for the memory of the experience, which is why you take pictures the whole time. I know people have gone on vacations that were just horrible vacations, and when they get back, they talk about what a wonderful time they had. It's like, you didn't have a wonderful time. You have 3 young kids. You had a horrible time. But 3 minutes on the trip were wonderful, and that's what they're remembering. They're coming back. People do that on Facebook, right? Their kid's been bad for 23 hours, and the 24th hour, they take a picture of their kid all cuddled up, and oh, you have such a wonderful life. So Caleb hit this as well. And I do think this is true. Your happiness depends more on the number of positive feelings rather than the intensity of the hit. Good news is good news first. How good matters little. So you have a pleasant life. You should spread those small effects. I don't know why you use effects, but maybe it is effects across time as evenly as possible. Plenty of mildly good news is preferable to one single lump of great news. I absolutely believe that. And I think, one of the reasons I retired in 2009, because I noticed this, and you're going to notice this as well, but every October, I heard it every October. I can't believe it's October. Can't believe this year is almost over. And I was thinking, boy, that is pretty sad. Another year's going, and I started thinking, why is that? And I've come convinced that this is the reason we get into our work life and there's so little change that time just flies by. And it's the worst case possible because while you're in the moment, it goes on forever. It's excruciating. It's like, I can't wait for this day to end. But then when we hit October, that's all the big blur. So we're in the moment when we hate it, it lasts forever. But after the moment, we're thinking about our lives, it's a blur. And so I became convinced it's all about changes. You need to vary up our lives, our days. Corporations should do this. I worry about, hey, I work for McDonald's for a month and Chick-fil-A for a week. I don't think I could do that. I don't know how these retail workers work in these jobs for 3 or 4 years, but I do know a lot of them switch jobs a lot. And I can see, yeah, I think that makes some sense. You need a new boss, you need new people you're working with, because those are pretty rough jobs. Oh, I hated McDonald's with a passion. I was on UT campus. I think at that time it was one of the largest McDonald's around. At lunchtime at UT Austin, McDonald's, and it was 50 people in line. It's this horrible, horrible job. And then doing that every day like that. So we need to switch it up. So if I were starting my career now, I would definitely be, my day would look radically different. One thing I would definitely do is every day I'd find someone different in the company and go have break with them and ask them about their life, ask them about their jobs, just something that breaks up the monotony of the life. And so I retired, and then I added tremendous variety in my days. And now it feels like I've been retired for 80 years. You know, the time has slowed down. It really, when I retired, time slowed down dramatically. It was kind of the opposite. My moment in the time was going much faster because I was having a blast, but my memory of time had slowed down, which I think is the perfect way to do it. So I don't know how y'all avoid the monotony of work life, but whatever you can do to switch things up, I think will make your life much, much, much happier. Anything else on Kahneman? I do highly recommend you read his book, although if you watch those 3 videos, you got about 80% of it. He is having quite an impact. Watch his YouTubes as well. He does have a new book out. I thought it was decent. This last one, Noise, I don't think it was good as Thinking Fast and Slow. And I'm not really sure he actually wrote it. I think he gets to a point now where he may just put his name on a book so it'll sell, and probably these other 2 people wrote it. Although this guy's pretty well known as well. So it was a good book, not as strong as the others. He put a little more practical into this one about what you can actually do. So I kind of like that. He does have some good ideas of, yeah, I could see a lot of it is I hear stuff and say, wow, I wish I'd done that when I was still working. So it's too late for me. So you might get more value out of it than I would. I thought it was a lot better than Annie Duke's second book. In her second book, she was really trying to be practical. And I'm listening to this thing on my bike, and she's like, stop and take out a piece of paper and write these 5 things. I was like, I'm not going to do that. So I'm like fast forwarding. So she was trying a little too hard. It was the same book again, but just with these exercises in it. But this one, I think he had some good ideas. So I would recommend reading it. It's not on the top of my list, but there's some good stuff in there. But be reading constantly. And, you know, some of y'all recommended books to me. My Audible, I think I've got 8 or 9 credits on my Audible because I can't find anything to read. So if y'all got ideas, send them to me. I can always, there's this really good professor who, I know I love music, so he does music. So I listen to his stuff and he's really, really good. But I've listened to everything he's done. So I'm running out of stuff to listen to. So any books y'all have on this topic? You know, Richard Thaler should have other books out there, because if he's really the father of behavioral finance, I don't know what else he's written. Oh, Misbehaving. Yeah, I remember that one. I have not read that one. That's probably one I should add to my list. Is that it? Nudge and Risk. Nudge and 6 different, here's Quasi-Rational Economics. So he's not a lot of books, but he does have some. I don't recommend, I don't know how many of y'all read this one. I couldn't get through it. Maybe I'm too old. Have y'all read this? Anybody? Okay. I shouldn't badmouth him, but boy, I didn't. It's a lot about how to, you know, young people, how to be successful in life and all that. So I'm probably just too old to care anymore. It's like I've already retired. All right, Doug Hubbard. We'll talk more about him next. I forget when I had the notes due. Do you may remember? Was it this week or next week or 30th? Are you saying?
30.
Wow, why do I have it so late? All right, well, we'll talk about it next week, even if you haven't read it. I do want to go through those questions. About 15 of you have already submitted your notes, so that's good. I really like Hubbard. I absolutely recommend you read all of his books. I have not read all of his books, but I plan to. I guess I should be adding his books to my reading list. Where is he? Here it is. I don't know what order I would do them in. I think I would start with How to Measure Anything. Where's his name? I want to click on his name. There he is. So I think I would start with How to Measure Anything, and then, come on, what's the deal? Is it moving? So start with How to Measure Anything. It falls real closely with your stats class. It gives you the basics of the math. The failure risk management, and the part you can't see is how to fix it. So it's a really ominous looking book. The failure risk management, why it's broken, and then the very end, how to fix it. So the how to fix it, I think, is the most important part of the book. He talks about that in his lecture, and a lot of it does has to do with better quantitative measurements. Those actuary majors, you could tell he's a big fan of actuaries, just like I am. I have not read this book because I'm not a cybersecurity person, but I'm actually thinking about reading it. I do recommend it to my cybersecurity majors. So aren't you cybersecurity? Yeah. So I would recommend that book. That tends to be his background. That might be it, just those books. But these two are exceptional books. They both are exceptional books. He's a consultant. He has his own company. He does a lot of corporate visits where he sits down with firms and goes through the risk. I was tempted at USA, see if we can get him to come in. He's a bit on the expensive side, to say the least, but he is.
John Yellen, is that expensive?
I don't think he's that much, but he's a little expensive. But he does speak at these conferences, and so you get to see him there for free. And he has some of those on YouTube, so that might be pretty good. When he does his sessions, and I was trying to get him to do some of the sessions here at UTSA, he doesn't actually do them. He has a staff that does them. So those are like in the $500 to $1,000 range. I sat in one of his sessions. I'll probably talk about one of his sessions here, not too long. I don't think I have it linked in here, but I'll show you the session. I thought it was good, but it's something I think I could replicate. And I don't know if I'd get sued if I replicated it, but I think I could produce what he's doing. I've seen others do it without giving him credit. So I think when you see it, it's not that difficult to actually set this thing up and do the math. It is pretty impressive how he shows you how uncalibrated you are at the beginning and how he moves you to more calibrated by the end. That's pretty impressive. I'm just not sure it works outside of that particular thing. Like if you actually took it over to finance. So I'd almost want to see a calibration where he focuses it entirely on finance and economics and shows you how to get better at the data. So he's the inventor of this is one of the questions, AIE, Applied Information Economics. It's probably not valuable for you to know this because it's not that well known as a term yet. He's created it, but it's not well known. I do have his PowerPoint out there. I think I put a couple of PowerPoints of his out there. One was a shortened version that I think was the same one that was part of your. There's a full version. I think you watched the short version. I don't know if these look familiar to you, but. So the most important decision you make is how you make decisions. How you what's your top priority project? How are you going to prioritize? That seems so obvious, but a lot of firms don't ever talk about that. So I'm not sure if that's the same one, but I gave you a longer version of his, and I don't remember where I got this, somewhere on some website somewhere, a more detailed presentation. This could be the one that he's doing. I don't recognize these charts. There's another book right there. I've never seen that one before. Pulse. So his presentations are fairly standalone. You can somewhat figure out what he's talking about. He does add a little bit more on top of it as explanation, but you can definitely see where he's going. So here's some quotes from his book, The Failure of Risk Management. Since this is a risk management class, I'll pick from there. So very similar to what Taleb said, and he does mention Taleb. In fact, he talks about Taleb quite a bit in his books, how to avoid making the mistakes Taleb's saying that we make all the time. And this is the first one. If you're flipping a coin, the normal distribution is a good indication of your uncertainty. So if you want to know the probability of flipping a heads 20 times in a row, you can use just very, very standard statistics. But financial markets, that's where we deal. Supply chains, we're learning that now, right? Supply chains, it's rare that something shows up 3 weeks early. It's not that unusual for something to be a month late or not come at all because of some global crisis. So very skewed. Major IT projects, I don't know what distribution they follow, but I can tell you if they say it's going to take a month, multiply by at least by 7, because it's going to take a lot more than a month. So IT, it's not like flights, where flights, sometimes you're on time, sometimes you're really late. With IT projects, you're never on time. You're always really late. Construction projects, you're never on time. I remember we built the building, the school I was working with, and they said, oh, we'll have it all done by August before school starts. And I told the principal, yeah, there's no way it can be open in August. And sure enough, we missed the whole next school year. They weren't ready. It's like, yeah, there's no way they're going to be done by then. It's just, they never get anything done all right on time. Major IT, these are complex systems. They have complex components, and the downside's always the worst. Why? And he says there's a power law on the failure side. Power law, that's kind of like, earthquakes. Not category, what's the earthquake? Seismic or whatever. Category 5 is not 20% less than category 6. It moves in a exponential scale. And that's what he's saying here. When you get on the failure side, it's not this nice little tail. It's the things blow up. Why? And he has some terms that are a little overlapping: contagion, mode failure, common mode failure, and cascade failure. So contagion is one thing fails, causes something else to fail. So we saw that in 2008. Bernanke said, I can't see the whole housing market all collapsing at the same time. Well, when you have all the banks doing the same thing, they're all making the same exact mistake on these loans, and they're doing it all over the country. You have something that's pretty unusual. Everybody's making the same mistake at the same time throughout the entire country. Yeah, when one thing fails, it's going to cause the banks to go under. The banks going under is going to cause something else to go under. It's going to cause this cascading effect. And I still say 2008 was not as bad as it could have been. We really were lucky in a few places. I think especially Bank of America buying Lehman or buying Merrill was huge. Common mode failure. It's not that one causes the other, but there's one thing that's hitting them all at the same time. This was the long-term capital management scenario we'll talk about. So long-term capital management was, hey, I can invest in South Africa, I can invest in Russia, I can invest in Brazil. I'm going to short the US Treasury, I'm going to invest in all these markets because they don't move together. Well, when do they move together? When you have a global liquidity crisis, they all topple. And the only thing that's up is treasuries. Well, when you short treasuries and you buy all these markets, it doesn't matter how well diversified you are, when the market hates risk, you're going to lose a fortune. And they're all reacting to the same type of thing. They're not causing each other to fail. They're just all crashing. And then the cascade failure, the failure of those components in the system started chain reaction of failures. So that to me is closely related to the contagion one. I really can't tell you what the difference in those. But we sit there just shocked. How could it have been this bad? Well, it's this bad because it's this bad. The fact that we hit this tipping point put us to a new tipping point that we've never seen before. I think you're going to see at least 2 of these in your career. You might see 3. We've been seeing them. Well, you know, we had the 73, 74. You had the 80, 81. You had the 87. You had the 94. You had the 98, the 2000, the 2008, and the 2020. You've had 8 of them here in the last couple of, you know, it's about every 5 years that we've had one. The 2008 to 2020 was a really good break, although the Tokyo earthquake, you could have thrown that in. It wasn't as bad as, you know, in our markets as it could have been, I guess. Of those, definitely the 87 crash, definitely the 2000 crash, definitely the 2008 crash. So that's 1 every 10 years. Those, I think, count as some of these incredible system failures. Well, it's just amazing kind of thing. 9/11 definitely falls in there, I think, as well. That one's kind of hard to gauge how you put that in with all the others. But we're talking about things that our math say could never happen, and at least every 10 years. So I guess you're going to see 4 of them then, if I'm right on that. And if you remember what Taleb said, is we're going to have more calm followed by bigger crisis, more calm, even better calm followed by bigger crisis. I still think the biggest risk to me is Taiwan. I just can't. Can y'all think of a bigger one than Taiwan? So what am I missing? What should you? I'm not worried about it because I'm going to move to Costa Rica and live in the jungles. But what should y'all be really? What would be bigger than China attacking Taiwan?
World War III.
War, that to me is kind of as World War III, isn't it? World War III, but we've never had a world war with nuclear warheads. We've had atomic warheads, but we haven't nuclear. What does World War III look like when you have nuclear weapons? So, yeah, I don't know. Taiwan is, how would the US react? I mean, you think about it. Xi's about to get his last 5 years or 10 years. Is it 10 years? He's going to get his last years. He's already said Taiwan's going to be resolved during his presidency. Something's going to happen, isn't it, during your career? So what is China going to do? They're going to attack Taiwan, and how is US going to react? What's going to happen to semiconductor industry? That's going to completely, every single thing that has a semiconductor is going to just crash, which is every single phone you have in this room. It's going to be incredible carnage if you think about it. Probably it's going to be horrible for the whole world if US steps in. I know I'm a big fan of Taiwan. I think we should do something. It's a democratic country, very free. You know, to me, it's just I can't fathom how market's going to react. I think it would be far worse than anything we've seen with the Russian attack. Prices around the world. You know, how are we going to react to China? Just, you know, we're a major trading partner. I don't know. So it just seems like that would just be such a horrendous situation, probably as bad as World War II in my mind, but who knows? But let's say you agree with me that something's going to happen on that in the next 15 years. Well, what do you do about that today? Is there anything you can do about that today? There's not a whole lot you can do, or is there? Is there anything you can invest in that's going to do really well if China attacks Taiwan?
Semiconductor market.
Well, yeah, but would semiconductor stocks go up if Taiwan got attacked?
Well,
I mean, Intel might be
if they can't produce anymore, it's gonna have to come from somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Intel becomes the biggest company in the world again. I'm not sure they wouldn't be decimated by it as well. I mean, it's just, to me, it's a very scary thought. Xi, to me, is a very scary person just because we don't know that much about him. It's a very, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly what he would do. He seems much more reserved and calculated than Putin. And
he also seems to be one that will wait for the right president and react, who knows? I'm sure he's watching Putin very closely now. It's interesting. The world has been so peaceful for so long. We're in this period of time where just, very few wars, but it's just starting to prop back up again. But who knows? She could be overrun by some popular uprising. Who knows what would happen? So, it's unlikely, but I wouldn't have thought Maduro would have lasted this long, and he's still going. The world is getting pretty wild. But I'm retired, so it's not my issue. I'm assuming no one's going to attack Costa Rica, so I'll be happy down there. But I won't be happy, but I'll at least be safe. All right. So that's what that power log means. Is things, when you get to those extremes, it's not just China attacking Taiwan, it's the way it's going to spread throughout the entire world. And my guess is we really don't know. We're going to find that out when it happens, how things are connected. And that's the other problem with the tele events, is we become shocked that, wow, I didn't realize South Africa's entire economy was based on Taiwan, and it's now having a major civil war, those kind of things where we just never think of them. He talks about this, we're measuring the wrong things, and he's pretty bold. Everybody, everywhere. Maybe that's a hyperbole. Everybody, everywhere, because I don't think he actually believes that, because he talks about actuaries and engineers that he does think are doing a pretty good job on this. Everybody, everywhere is focusing on the least valuable measurements at the expense of the most valuable measurements. Everybody, everywhere is systematically measuring all the wrong things. It is so pervasive and impactful that I have to wonder how much this affects the gross domestic product. Organizations appear to measure what they know how to measure without wondering whether they should learn new measurement methods for very high value uncertainties. Now he's saying every firm you're going to walk into has this issue. So, and I do think most of your firms are going to have the heat maps. So again, just a reminder on the heat maps, you're going to see them. I don't want to get you fired in your first job, but I think they're useless. I don't know if anyone wants to stand up for heat maps, but I think they're useless. This is what we had at UTSA, and they wanted me to list all my risks and put them in this box. Rare or very likely, impact low or very high. What statistics are you seeing there? Someone define rare for me. I know what it means for stakes. I don't know what it means for risk, probability. So again, I think I already used this example, but again, if you're talking about a car crash and a 1% chance of car crash, and you drive, 1,000 days, then you're going to have 10 car crashes. That may not be a good example. Megan, think of another one. But if you're thinking skydiving, you have a firm that does 1,000 skydives a year, and 10 people die. You're probably not going to use that firm. You can say, well, it's only 1% of the time. No, what percent do you want for skydivers? I would go with 0. My guess is a skydiving firm has a death that they're probably going to go out of business. They're definitely going to go out of business after the second one. After the first one, maybe they can survive on that. But if it's 1% rare, some people might say 10% is rare. If you're talking about the chance of stubbing your toe or something, So what's rare? And there's nothing there. Very likely. What's very likely? More than 50%. I had a big debate in my first finance class I took. The exam question, she used the word likely. In my mind, likely means more than 50% chance. So I said it was incorrect. It's not likely to happen. It was something that didn't have a high probability of happening. She said, no, likely means, 5-10% chance. It's like, okay, that's not the way I interpret it. So what is likely? Some people are out there thinking likely means more than 50% chance. Some people might think likely means a 90% chance. Someone tells you, I'm likely to get the job. What do you think? Or if they say, I'm very likely to get this job, what's the probability you think? 98%. So I'm very likely to win the lottery. You're going to say, well, you're either cheating or you got a problem with statistics. And then the impact, again, very high impact, very low impact. Some of them might say, well, stubbing my toe is a high impact because it really hurts. Some might say, no, death is a very high impact. There's a big difference in those two. But they collect this all over the company. They go out to the company. This is all the instruction they give me. List your risk and put them in these boxes. And they're going to take all of that and they're going to put it into a box for the entire entity. To me, it's value. Maybe the value is going through the process of listing your risk and thinking in these terms. But to me, the final thing they put together, it's like you got such a hodgepodge of definitions in this, and they don't even try to define it. They just give us these terms that could mean all kinds of things. Low impact. To me, low impact might be zero. You know, are we only talking about losses? Some of the things I dealt with have gains. Where do I put the gains? You know, so I just don't understand it. But you will see this. A lot of firms use this. Very, very popular. It gives me some confidence that Doug Hubbard hates these things as well. You know, and people much smarter than I am agree with me. It makes me feel smarter. So I'm glad. But I think that's the main thing he's actually talking about here. Now, he did criticize Monte Carlo. Y'all remember that criticism that a lot of the inputs to Monte Carlo were what? Subjective inputs from experts. So he said, you know, have you ever actually tested if that expert actually knows what they're talking about? So I can see that. I spent most of my career with actuaries. I can tell you actuaries, they don't do anything subjective. They refuse to give you data if it's not based on something. So I've never met an actuary who says, yeah, you know, just thinking about it. No, they get on the computer and they start running numbers, and then they send me something, which I kind of liked. It was kind of refreshing. So he's pretty negative on that kind of thing. How do you do this in an industry that is paying you not to do what these authors are saying? So I think Leibowitz has it. I love this quote. The great investors are like great sailors. They have the courage to set forth. So you do have to take risk in this world, no question. They know where they want to go. They have a strong gyroscope to keep them on course. They have appropriate respect for the dangers of the sea, so they're not overconfident in its potential for radical shifts and weathering currents. And then the most important thing, they are not afraid to be along for long stretches. And I do think that's the key. And that's where Taleb, I think where Kahneman was really picking on Taleb, is that most people don't have this ability. So y'all remember the 4 risks on the first exam question, career risk. Career risk prevents you from being able to do this because your boss will not tolerate you. So this is again where the family office type of approach. Family offices do allow you to be different for a long period of time. The Yale University, Harvard University types of portfolios where they say, we don't care what the competition's doing. I fortunately had a CEO. If I told him everybody else is doing that, he didn't want to do it. So he was a maverick. That's the way I could get him to approve stuff. It's like, well, we'll be the only ones doing this. Okay, where do I sign? He's like, yeah, let's do it. That's pretty rare. You don't see that very often. But he was convinced everybody else didn't know what they're doing. So we might as well have y'all aren't Seinfeld fans, right? So y'all don't know George Costanza do the opposite. Y'all know that show? All right. Well, George Costanza, every decision he ever made was always wrong. So Jerry says, well, then if every decision you did was wrong, then you should do the opposite, and that would be right. And then suddenly George has this beautiful girlfriend and a good job and all that. I'm not recommending you do that, but there are times in finance where you got to have the guts to be wrong for 6 months while you're waiting for whatever to happen. There were people calling the subprime market in 2016, 2017. I mean, 2006, 2007. And they probably got fired, lost a lot of money. If they could have just made it another 6 months, 9 months, they would have made a fortune. But, you know, being early just doesn't play. All right, read. There's probably more people. I'm hoping you're going to send me some books. There's got to be some great thinkers out there I haven't discovered yet. I've been reading some books that I thought were kind of good, but it wasn't really something new. So they're taking exactly what we've seen here and they just put another angle on it, another way of thinking about it. I want some new radical thoughts. So as you read, send me books, give me some ideas. I want to know who are the great thinkers out there. They've got to be out there. I assume they're out there. One thing, I'm a musician. I asked my musician friends, where's the Dmitri Shostakovich? Where's the Beethoven? Where's the Mozart? They don't exist today. Can you name one great composer other than Philip Glass? Can you name one great composer today?
There's one, he did an album with the London Symphony Orchestra. His name is Pharaoh Sanders.
Never heard of him. I have to look him up.
There's an album called Promises. I think it's amazing.
I'll look it up. But where are these great names? So maybe risk management, we had our Beethovens and our Shostakoviches, and there's nothing else new under the sun, but I doubt that's the case. We'll see. I'm not a big fan of Philip Glass, but and that's where music's gone, is minimalism. Let's stop doing great stuff and let's just do minimal. And it's like, I was listening to one of the Academy Awards songs. It's like 2 chords for 5 minutes. I was thinking, man, that was it didn't win. I was kind of glad it didn't win. It was like, that's really boring. But, all right. So where do we go from here? We're going to do case studies here. I haven't decided if I'm going to do Tylenol yet because it's getting kind of old. I am going to do MG. MG is an old case, but I really love it. It's a great example of finance doing their job really well, and the whole world blows up. So how can you, this is a basis risk. So what you got to do on the exam, I might actually give you the exam guide so you can start seeing where you need to be preparing, and you could actually start preparing some of your answers now. It is one of these things where pick one of the two, and you got to pick one and give an answer. It will be open books, so which actually makes it harder because I'm expecting a better answer. But each one of these have something specific to them. Tylenol is the public relations case. Y'all probably have heard Tylenol enough now. But MG, you probably don't know MG. Dr. Misra gave me the MG case. And I thought, wow, that's a really good case. We're going to read. I have 2 articles out there. One's a short one. One's a really long article. We'll summarize both of them. Orange County is still a really good case, mainly because it's a case where if you had just done what we learned in this class, you didn't have to do anything that was 10 years of experience. If you just done what we did in this class, you could have prevented this. You could have stepped into Orange County and prevented this massive insolvency. And then long-term capital management is a great example of a lot of things going wrong, but mainly correlation, over-reliance on correlation. Very much back to what we talked with Dalio and Bridgewater, and is correlation really something you can rely on. So we're going to do those cases. Before we do that, let me summarize our big lessons. So we'll see if any of these come up in these cases. All right, this first one, infrastructure. If you want to do options, you want to do futures, you want to do swaps, you want to do swaptions, but the thing you want to manage is not a concern right now, set it up right now. Build the infrastructure when you don't need it, so that it's there when you need it. It's kind of like you need a wall on the coast because of the hurricanes coming, and your boss says, well, that's fine, let's wait for the next hurricane, then we'll build it. Does that make a lot of sense? Well, boss, it takes 9 months to build one. That's okay, we'll just wait. We'll see it out in the ocean and we'll build it. Well, we don't have enough time. When do you build the seawall? Probably in November, December, January, when there's no hurricanes and you have time to do it and do it right. I learned this y'all heard my story on swaps. It can take 6-9 months to get the contracts done. You have so many parties that have to sign off. The language is complicated. You've never done these before. Your lawyers don't know what they're doing because they've never done this before and they're trying to figure it out and they're already busy. So build the infrastructure when you don't need it. But the problem is getting people to approve stuff when no one's worried about this. So the life insurance actuaries, they wanted to do swaptions and they were worried about interest. I can't remember if it was rates rising or falling. I can't remember. They were worried about the thing no one else was worried about. And they said, this is the perfect time because no one's thinking about this. The insurance is really cheap right now. We want to do this now. And I could never get it approved. People just like, why are you worried about that? If you're hedging, so I gave you the USAA example with the pension plan. If you're hedging, that doesn't mean you stop paying attention. Hedges do blow up. We'll see that with MG. We call that basis risk, tracking risk. In my case, it blew up fortunately in our favor, but they can blow up against you. You always watch hedges very, very closely. Make sure they're doing what you're expecting them to do. Remember the guy at Merrill Lynch, the CEO of Merrill Lynch? He asked his team, what are y'all doing about this major risk we're seeing here? And they said, oh, we got it hedged, don't worry about it. And that was the full extent of his research. He just trusted his department. What is someone who's sitting on dynamite gonna say? Don't worry, no problems. All right? They don't want to be embarrassed. They're just gonna hope that nothing happens. That's a big risk management tool of a lot of workers, because their worst case scenario is what? It blows up, they get fired. Who cares? Right? So their best strategy is say, hey, nothing to worry about it. It's gonna be fine, hoping everything will turn around and they'll get out of it by luck. That's the boss has got to realize that, and they've got to say, well, prove it to me. So just because someone says something's hedged or is hedged, but we'll see this with MG. How do you understand a risk go to the extreme? Take oil prices to $300. Take the VIX to 80. Take interest rates to 10%. Anybody think interest rates will be 10% next year? Probably not, but do it anyway. Stock market falls 50%. Try these kind of things and just see, can you handle it? If you can't handle it, it puts you out of business, then maybe you need to cut off those tails of the distribution. So you understand risk the best at the extreme. Think in portfolio context. Don't think in isolation, think in portfolio, look at everything together, try to model your business in total. If we have time at the end of the semester, we'll talk about this from an individual standpoint, how you should view your own balance sheet that way. Because most people, it's like the lady I was working at USA, she's viewing each thing as in a piece. You bring it all together and look at what risks that you have. You have health risk, you have premature death, you have living too long, you have interest rates, inflation, stock markets, you have all of those. And some of those are correlated with each other. You need to look at it in a context, mainly because, first of all, some things may be hedging themselves. But secondly, back to Doug Hubbard, there may be some things where they all do happen at the same time under a certain scenario. And that's the scenario you might say, you know what, I can't take that scenario. And you're gonna have to stop and address that scenario. That may be more true of a company than you individually. When managing risk, be unconventional. Tradition doesn't work, and it fails at the worst possible time. Be willing to be alone for some time, but this one, I don't know if you can really do this one. It really depends on what job you have. So what I tell students, your first job, you just got to take it and learn it. You're not gonna have much flexibility. You just want someone to pay you a salary. But after 3 or 4 years, you're gonna be amazed how much you're gonna learn in the first 3 years. If you have a boss that scares you to death, how much you're gonna learn in your first 3 years. If you're teaching your boss after 6 months, you need to flee like it's a ship going under. None of y'all should be, if any of y'all are indispensable after 6 months, you got to flee. I had one of the guys I hired out of UTSA, they wouldn't let him take a job because he was indispensable. So he quit USA, took a job somewhere else, came back to USA 9 months later and got the job he wanted. It's like, I can't be indispensable. You need to train someone else to take my job. That doesn't make any sense. So be working for people that scare you to death, and after 3 years, you're going to have the option to pick the job you want, and that's when you're going to start asking really specific questions about where you want to work. And then don't protect your ego, kill your ego, make your ego about learning, becoming better educated, more, make that your ego, that I'll learn something from this versus I was right. Change your ego perspective from being right to being more knowledgeable. So those are my 5. So we're going to start the case studies, and all right, let's start. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the exam, because we got a kind of a surprise this year. The last day of classes is the 3rd and exams on the 5th. I don't know if y'all noticed that. They've never done that before. When's study days? And study days is that Wednesday? Why do they do it like that? So there's no way we can do that. So what we're going to do on the 5th is we'll do the math problems. And then you'll submit the essays open book, and I'll give you many more days on the essays. I think you need at least a weekend on the essays because they're pretty tough essays. All right. Now read this very carefully. I had one student would have made A in the class, but he misread the instructions. So you have to answer this question. It's essentially a define, measure, mitigate bring everything you have together. And some students, this is way too surface. I want deep answers. So the big risk, we talked about interest rate, price, and credit risk. Pick one of those, and then two of the smaller risks: liquidity, basis, model, legal, disclosure, operational, currency. And do the define, discuss, measure, mitigate, all of that. The price risk might be the easiest because you wrote so much about that in your paper. You got the stress test and the value at risk and those kind of things, and the measurement and the correlation and the limits. But you need to put some depth into it. So pick one of those. Obviously, on the interest rate risk, you have the whole balance sheet utilization, everything we did there. You could really get carried away on that one. The second one is you have three choices, and you have to pick one of them. The first one's that whole issue of diversification and standard deviation and all of that. That's my blog, right? So you have my blog. Obviously, I want a really good meaty answer. We talked about it in class as well. The second one you can't really get started on yet, but the case studies. So pick two of these case studies and talk about them. You have some really good summary articles. You can't just copy and paste what I give you. You have to put it into your own words. So taking notes right now is going to be really important. And then the key lessons learned. So we're going to talk about the case. So you need to set the case up, and then what were the lessons learned. Or the third one is pick two of these, Hubbard, Taleb, Kahneman, or Duke, and talk about what they said. Two might be a little much, but this is my favorite part of the class. So what did they have to say? There is some overlap, obviously, between them. But find some way, find two of those. So pick one of those three. And then we're going to do the credit spread one, which is probably the easiest one. We'll do that on the 5th. And then you have these risk problems. Most students do pretty well on this, although it's a lot of math calculation that you have to do by hand. So you got to get your calculator out. I don't count off for math errors, but make sure you write everything out. So, and it's closed book. The math questions are closed books. So you'll have to do those on Thursday, but you'll have your paper in on April 29th. That gives you, get 6-7 days there, 8 days, or 5th, maybe 6 days to work on the math. All right. We might, in our last class, if we have time, work one of these math questions just to give you some practice. All right. So that's the exam. Any questions on that? 2 essays that'll be due online sometime the week after the 5th. And then 2 math questions we'll do on the 5th in here at, I think, 5 o'clock. All right. I don't know who idea it was have finals 2 days after the last class. That's just crazy. All right, good. Everybody's good. All right. Okay, let's talk cases. So I do want to do the Tylenol case, but I'm going to do it fairly quickly, or somewhat just walk through it. Tylenol is a major product of Johnson & Johnson. I think it's still around today. I don't think it's as big today as it was back then, but not because of this case. I just think everything else has come along that's, better products have come along. And Tylenol has had some issues, health issues unrelated to this case. So the key to this case, so you really want to, if you're writing an essay, what is the real key? The key on this case is public relations. That's what this one's all about. Can you handle, so remember we talked about risk prevention and risk reduction. Risk prevention, you're trying to reduce the frequency of the risk. This one's on risk reduction. Focus on the severity. How do you get the severity down? I want to relate this, and you can certainly, if you do this as your essay, bring this second article in because I think it's related. Doctors and malpractice suits, what happens to their severity when they actually say we messed up and admit their mistakes versus the old approach? So I'll use that as somewhat of a backup related to this public relations issue. So 7 people died mysteriously. It hit the news, especially when they figured out. In fact, I think the story here, I don't know if it's in this article, but the story here is they were somewhat lucky that they discovered it when they did. I think some fireman or someone figured it out. It was pretty amazing. But it's a product tampering question. Extra strength Tylenol were found to contain 65 milligrams of cyanide. That's 10,000 times more poison than was needed. So that's a pretty extreme case. Now, my life insurance class, we talk about another person who did the same thing. It's a really pretty pathetic case. But while this was going on, or after this went on, a lady poisoned her husband. Did we talk about it in our class last semester? I think we did. And I think it was a double indemnity life insurance. So I think it was 40,000. So double indemnity, you get 40,000 unless they die in an accident, then you get 80,000. So she wanted her husband to die by the Tylenol poisoning. And so she poisoned him and he dies, and they rule it natural causes. So she doesn't get her extra 40,000. So she kills, I forget how many people. She puts more lace tablets in the store so more people would die. And then after those people died, people are thinking, oh, it's a copycat. So she calls the police and says, hey, I wonder if it's any chance that my husband might have died because he took some Tylenol before he died. Well, sure enough, they found cyanide. They also found her favorite plant food in the Tylenol. So she went to jail for 40,000 bucks and killed her husband and killed, I forget, two other people. I don't know if she used 10,000 times the limit. So that's the other issue with these kind of high profile cases. You have the copycats, you have people, just doing it because they get the idea. So it's a pretty serious event. So it becomes this national headline risk. The nation was warned about the danger of Tylenol. That's obviously not what you want to hear about your product. Warnings on loudspeakers. They're going around the streets. So you probably don't want your product on loudspeakers, like, do not take this product. National TV reporting about the deaths. Then they're showing, the funerals afterwards. It's just terrible for Tylenol. The FDA advised consumers to avoid Tylenol until the series of deaths in Chicago area can be clarified. Then they have to figure out where it happened. So you've seen this before. I don't remember on the Bluebell ice cream if they discovered exactly where that happened, but you're trying to tie it back. Did it happen after the point they made it? Did it happen en route? Did it happen at the supermarket? Obviously, if it's 7 or 8 different stores, it's not the supermarket, but you got to figure that out while it's going on. So the same thing here. They're trying to figure out, did it happen at Tylenol? And they could tell pretty quickly, based on the way it was working, that this was not something Tylenol caused. It didn't happen at their factory. So they could have said, hey, it's not our problem. It's, it's happening at the store. The police can go figure that out. And here it is right here. It came from 4 different manufacturing lots. What's the possibility 4 different factories have the exact same exposure to the same thing? I mean, that's just not possible. So they're tampered with and they're placed back on the shelves. And then you got people, just psychologically, they're thinking, oh, I think I've got Tylenol poisoning. And so then you have these people going to hospital because they have a cold, and then the copycats. This happened in my lifetime. Back when Halloween, we used to go door to door. People were putting actual razors into Halloween candy, and there was copycats with that. And it just like, I still have this picture of this sweet little lady across from our church. She made candied apples for everybody, and she must have spent her whole week doing that. And my parents says we got to throw it in the trash because of the lace, because of the thing where I felt so guilty as a little kid. It's like, this poor little lady, she worked all week on this. So the copycats is a big issue. They needed to find the best way to deal with this. So Johnson & Johnson has an issue. They got this very, very profitable product, very popular, probably leading the industry. It's been tampered with. And the answer that came out initially is Tylenol is done. They will never rebound from this. This is too much for any product to handle. So I don't think they can ever sell another product under that name. So how did they respond? So a couple of phases here. The first thing they have to do is figure out, do they admit that they got a problem. So obviously they succeeded because Tylenol came back fairly quickly. So what was it that they did? Public relations, and both of these phases are related to public relations. But the first one is, how do they respond? So this is what they say. You don't know internally what their actual conversations were, but they said, let's put customer safety first, forget about profits, alert consumers. Now you might say, well, duh, that's what you do. But if you look at the Perrier, and I don't know how to spell Perrier. Can someone help me? Is that right? There's a Wikipedia. It may not come up because Perrier with water is probably not. But anyway, they had a thing where people were finding glass inside the bottle. And Perrier is like, we didn't do anything wrong. You know, it's not our problem. And they weren't going to do anything. They didn't admit that it was a problem or it was serious. And then they discovered it was something that they had done wrong and it was their problem. So that's what you can do. You can say, hey, we'll just don't admit. That's what the lawyers are going to say, right? Don't admit anything. It's not our problem. Somebody else's, it's the store's problem. So that's one approach you could take. Johnson & Johnson instead said, hey, let's go out and say, we've got a problem here. We're really worried about it. We don't know if, even say it may be our fault. So we're looking at our own manufacturing. That's what you got to do. I don't remember how Chipotle handled theirs. I actually don't think Blue Bell handled theirs very well at all, because Blue Bell has this reputation of trust in Texas. This is really kind of pristine brand name. I think they could have come out much more quickly and said, hey, we got a problem, we got to deal with it. But Johnson & Johnson decided, let's go out immediately and say, we're very worried about this. This is very serious. Telling our own consumers to stop using our product. And then the biggest issue was the product out there. More than likely, the product was perfectly safe in most of the country. But they decided to pull the product off the shelves. $100 million worth of product, they're just going to throw away probably perfectly good product. That's a pretty big decision to make. Oh, here's the period right here. 2 R's. They say isolated incident, don't worry about it. And it actually ended up blowing up on them, the opposite of public relations. So they went out and they actually worked with the authorities, the Chicago police, FBI, FDA, just in case it was happening at their site. And because they're so aggressive and they came out, they actually got the media on their side, which is part of what you've got to do in these kind of cases. I think airlines really mess up on this after an accident. You've probably seen the stories where the airlines won't tell the families anything. And they're just so, just tell us something. At least come out and say what you know, even if you don't know much. But airlines were just kind of close-lipped, and it's really just horrible. And it's horrible to the extent that the media take the side of those that are complaining, because the media are looking for a story, and there's no better story than crying relatives saying that this big bad corporation won't talk to us. You got to somehow get yourself so you're not in that position. So they're giving positive coverage. They applauded Johnson & Johnson for being honest with the public. They added that the company never attempted to do anything other than try to get to the bottom of the deaths. Even when it was pretty obvious they weren't at fault, they still recalled the product. And then it just continues. So now they're burying the people who died. That's more coverage hitting the newspaper, hitting the TV set. Johnson & Johnson executives wept, not only out of grief, but some out of guilt. The company offered to exchange the capsules. They have already been purchased for tablets. They're doing what they can. So it's going to cost them a lot of money. You say they're not worried about profits, but who knows what they're real. I don't try to guess what people are really thinking. But if they lost the public relations, it was done for anyway. Maybe they should have thrown in the towel, just gotten rid of the product. Who knows? But you got to sit down. Do you think a firm like this is doing math, looking at the numbers, or this entirely? I mean, this is the argument they're making. This is entirely put the consumer first. We don't care how much we lose. Who knows what the discussions were? So So they had a 37% market share. I doubt they have that today. And so they're going to try to bring it back. A marketing campaign. They were reintroduced in November. I don't remember when this thing actually happened. And a triple seal tamper resisting package. And that's going to cost them a lot of money, but not just them, all their competitors have to do that as well. This is one thing people have criticized them on. There's a lot of people who think they should have had the tamper resistant bottle already. There was enough in the press that this was an issue, not necessarily Tylenol, but all of these companies should have had tamper resistant. So, you know, you could criticize them there. They gave coupons. They worked with the doctors. I mean, that's the other thing, you got to get hospitals and doctors back on your side. So, you know, you give them kickbacks. Doctors love free stuff and trips and gifts and all that. They're a pretty easy group to get back on your side. 2250 salespeople were asked by Johnson to make presentations in the medical community. The article, in a sense, provided free advertisement. So essentially, they've had this big media event. They're not going to take advantage of that. They have a media event to essentially let the media do their advertising for them for free. If you can figure out a way to do that, that's great. They gained back much of the market that it lost. This article continued a media trend of publicizing their comeback. So then they started getting articles about how this was a public relations win. You know, they were becoming Harvard Business Review. You know, they were just winning on all angles. So it says culture. So part of this is the CEO. His idea was we put the customer safety first, and that's going to drive. And so that's their argument. I don't know for sure that's the case. So that's the story you actually get versus the story that's true. You never know. That's why I don't like Harvard business cases. I actually don't think many of them are actually all that realistic. I think they're rewritten so that they work in Harvard classrooms, but you know, I think the world was far, far more complicated than that. I was at some of USA's big blow-ups. I don't know if y'all remember, y'all probably weren't alive, but USA was using a lot of programmers from India, and they hired them. They were lower wage people, and the local news was out in force. Y'all remember that story, NFL? That's probably before your time. Just horrible press for you. USA doesn't get much horrible press here in San Antonio. But they got horrible press. Why don't you hire, you know, Americans to do your programming? Why are you hiring people from India? I worked with a lot of people that are really great people. It's like I was kind of, they were fun to work with, but they probably were paid less than if they'd hired people here, but that's what they did. So they had the media showing these people from India. Most of them live, I lived across the street in an apartment, and that's where they live. So they show them walking home. So they had this video of, you know, 15, 20 people walking home, and terrible. Our CEO was livid. My word, he was so mad. I don't know how many people got fired as a result of that. He was livid. I don't think he handled it too well. He was just so mad. They weren't about to let him get interviewed because he hated the local media so much. He wanted them actually taken out. So, I mean, that's part of the problem, but whatever story hit the press, they just kept him hidden away because there's no way they could show him. It's tough to do public relations when your CEO is that lividly mad that the media is mistreating us. They got the story all wrong. And the other problem he had was someone inside the company had provided all this information that they shouldn't have. And so then it became, where's the leak? Where's the leak? That is never good for a company's morale. When your CEO's, okay, where's the leak? That person's gonna be fired. That never, people are, hey, I really enjoy working here. So the culture, what is the culture? How does that affect decisions that the company make? They talk about their credo. Johnson & Johnson turned their credo for help. You know, again, I don't know if that's true. Outline his company's responsibility. So here's what their credo said: consumers and medical professionals using the products, employees, communities where the people work and live, and to its stockholders. So you notice the stockholders is the last one. Cooperate fully with the media. So that's where USA really fell down. The media had this story, and our CEO was like, don't talk to them. They don't know what they're doing. Just close the lip. I think if he'd gone out and done a story, what do media love? They love a good story. Best thing you can do is say, hey, come on in. We'll tell you everything you want to know. You know, but we did the exact opposite of that. From this point on, the media did much of the company's work. the widest US coverage since the assassination of Kennedy. I don't know how they got the statistics on that. You may have heard this in other classes. This is given as the PR example. Now, if you go out there have been stories since then that this has been overstated and it wasn't as great as a win as they say and all that. So that's kind of a problem with these stories. They take on a life of their own. So let's look at that from a standpoint of doctors. So Ryan, you're in my class. So do doctors ever make mistakes? We looked at that, and we looked at what percentage of surgeons actually wash their hands. I forget what it was. It was pretty pathetic. When they put a camera to see how many surgeons actually wash their hands, it was a very low percentage. And that was even, it wasn't 100% even when they knew the video was there. That was to me the amazing thing. It's like, I'm a doctor, I'm a surgeon, I have no germs. So they do make mistakes, and they make a lot of mistakes. What was it? The third leading cause of death in the United States is hospital and doctor mistakes. I mean, it's pretty massive. They make a lot of mistakes. Some of it's because they're human. Some of it's because they're sloppy. So there is some evidence hospitals. In fact, I think in our life insurance class, the amazing thing is when doctors are required to report their error rates drop dramatically. It actually changes behavior. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So when doctors make mistakes, admitting the error and saying, I'm sorry, so empathy, and offering compensation may go a long way toward preventing malpractice lawsuits. The program included a procedure for telling patients and their families about errors. And what did lawyers say? Don't say anything, don't admit mistakes. This program, they actually went and tested and said, hey, if you make a mistake, go tell the family you made a mistake and that you're really sorry about it. Explaining who made the error, how it occurred, what steps were taken to prevent a similar mistake in the future, making a sincere apology to the patient or their family, and offering fair compensation for harm when at fault. The result was a reduction in lawsuits and other compensation. Faster resolution, that's pretty good too, right? You don't want to go on 2 or 3, 4 years on these kind of things. And lowered the cost overall. They even give you the numbers. After healthcare providers began admitting mistakes, apologizing, and offering compensation, the monthly rate for new claims fell from 100,000 patient encounters, from 7 to 4.52, a 36% reduction. Now you might say, well, they might win some of these lawsuits, but you win a lawsuit by paying a doctor more than the lawsuit. I was listening to some podcast today. This city, a guy got out of jail because he was falsely accused. He was in jail. Y'all may have seen this story. He's in jail for 21 years. And they discovered that the police officer that got him put away had been lying. And so he sued the city and he won for $6 million, and the city's refusing to pay him. You want to guess how much the city paid in lawyer fees to fight this case? Any guesses? I mean, you're probably going to overguess, but they paid lawyers $4 million because they didn't want to pay this guy $6 million. And they're probably going to end up having to pay something anyway. They're refusing. And instead, what they're doing, they're suing him to reimburse some of their employees that had legal fees. So they had this guy in jail for 21 years because of their mistake. And they're now suing him because he sued some people that had legal. I mean, so, the lawyer fees are huge. No offense, Luke, if you're a lawyer, the legal profession makes a lot of money defending people, and just getting this thing done. Now lawyers don't like this, right? This is reducing the fees the lawyers are going to make, but it's got to make life much better for the doctors. The median time it took to resolve dropped by several months. The mean cost for liability, including compensating patients, fell by 60%. The average cost of lawsuit when were filed decreased from nearly 406 to 228,000. Part of it is people are just not as mad. Some of this is lawsuits is just, man, they were heartless. They wouldn't talk to me. I think that's what airlines have experienced. Is, just go out and tell the family you're really sorry about this. This is every single thing we know. You're constantly talking to them. You hire people that's all they do is just talk to the family members. That by itself can reduce the heartache of the family as well as their anger when they sue you. The program started with the belief that doctors had an ethical obligation to disclose mistakes, and it followed that making a fair offer of compensation was also the right thing to do. They really didn't know what it was going to do. So they went into this thing not knowing. I don't know which hospital they got the, it sounds like a pretty risky thing. Say, let's admit our mistakes. The sincerity, the honesty, and the transparency are the three big drivers. There is a lot of research that has shown that when people are upset or when they feel there is a lack of honesty, they are more likely to sue. Our study does not prove a disclosure and offer program reduce liability. What it shows is that it can do this and not break the bank. Yeah, this is a similar article, but I don't know what's happened since then. It's, if you take my life insurance class, I'm kind of negative on this industry because its incentives are, I think, are a little bit messed up. I don't remember if it was a radio program or an article, but this gentleman had discovered that if hospitals execute this particular procedure, their error rates were dropped dramatically. And he was telling this to a CFO, and the CFO said, "Why would I ever do that? Fixing our mistakes is a huge part of our revenue." So he says, "That's the stupidest thing I could do." Is you hear that and you go, okay, there's something wrong with this industry. But it's true. Doctors, a big part of what hospitals' income is fixing the people that they infected or the sponges they left inside of them, or amputating the wrong limb or whatever. Fixing those problems, they make a lot of money doing that, so they don't have an incentive. So there's already a big problem with this industry. But this article, says at least you can address some of the liability costs by simply being a little more honest. So there's the public relations side. How do you handle things when things go wrong? I think Perrier. I may be bad mouthing Bluebell. See if I can get Perrier in there. Well, let me do Bluebell. What was it? A product recall, maybe? When did this happen? It's the listeria. I think I remember that term. Is there a Wikipedia page on this? That's always my go-to. In 2015, it issued the first recall. The recall, that seems like it was more recent in 2015. Am I remembering it incorrectly? I lose track of time here. The recall was issued on an assortment of items due to the discovery of 5 cases of I don't know what that is, in Kansas, believed to be caused by products produced in Oklahoma. So much for this being a Texas company. 3 of the 5 patients died despite a series of subsequent recalls and the temporary shutdown and enhanced sampling program launched, including 3 further cases. So maybe that was the problem, is even after they said they fixed it, they had more cases. Leading to the disposal of over 8 million gallons. Oh, I know people that would just break their heart. I rode my bike to Brennan, Texas, and I was like expecting free Bluebell everywhere, but there was none. You had to go in the stores and buy it. I was really disappointed. But it has a good reputation. It's pretty well known. I don't think their ice cream is any better than HEB's, but there's some people who think that's sacrilegious. But y'all can tell me. Y'all can tell a difference.
No.
It's more expensive. I can't tell a difference, but so I think they had a public relations issues and the way they handled it. So anyway, public relations is important. I don't think USA handled theirs well. Perrier didn't handle theirs well. Now USA has had some issues since then, since I retired. The big thing they had a few years ago is they made it really public that they were going to stop being a sponsor of a conservative TV talk host. This is USA. So some military guys. They handle it so badly. They ended up saying, well, we're not sponsoring anybody, left or right. We're just stopping that. But the way they first did it, it was just, oh, you should have seen you couldn't read them all. There was thousands of messages sent to USA. People were just absolutely livid. Several people stopped doing business with USA. They just handle it so poorly. I'm not saying, I like any program, but you kind of have to stop and think, who your clientele is, and there's a good chance, you know, a good percentage of them like that particular host. All right, any comments, questions on that? Can y'all think of a case, a major case I should add to this? One thing I will say on airlines, is airlines do a great job after the fact, going back and looking at it. I forget the name of this. There's a program that does this, but I can't remember the name of it. I've gotten just hooked on this program.
Do you mean like people that do it, or do you mean actual?
It's a documentary where they recast it and they show it.
There are computer programs that re-simulate the actual plane crash.
No, I'm talking about, there's a TV program that actually goes through. They do show on that program where they actually go on the computer and see if they can simulate what they think the problem was. And a lot of times they discover that that can't be it. We can't get the plane to crash. There's some pretty amazing stories, and we all talk about that miracle on the Hudson. There's one program, this guy did the exact same thing in another country, and it was far harder because he had bridges to deal with. And I'm thinking, why don't we know about this guy? I thought that was pretty amazing. But and there's one guy who landed on the, you know, it's pretty amazing what some people did. And a lot of them, it's total complete loss. The plane crashes. But what's interesting is that's the first 20 minutes, but the last half or even 2/3 of the program is what they go through to figure out exactly what happened, and trying to, you know, and then we talked about earlier the close calls, looking at the close calls, and it doesn't have to crash. It could just have been an emergency, and they'll go back and research it. So I like that. And to me, as someone flying, I'm glad they're a little picky on that. I know we all get really mad when the airline says, you know, we have to change planes, we have a maintenance issue. We're all thinking, oh, there's some doorknob that's not working. What is it? But, you know, it's probably better that they cancel the flight and move us to another plane. But can y'all think of it? What other big operating risk can you think of? Ford Pinto, that one's actually fairly interesting because, oh, what's his name? The famous economist, Friedman. He has a YouTube on that, and you might find it offensive, but he actually supports Ford's decision. And his argument was, I mean, you might want to listen to this. I'm not saying I endorse it, but I love Milton Friedman, and he's looking at it from the total thing. That he's actually saying if Ford had done what they're doing, you probably would have seen more people die. So he's saying when you look at it in total and not just look at a specific case. So Friedman's great, whether his math is good or not, but anyway. And, you know, someone's coming up and saying, you know, how can you like capitalism? Look what Ford did. Friedman and his normal calm self, the kids yelling at him like you're the most evil person on the planet. And Friedman's like, well, let's look into that. He's just real kind of like Kahneman was with Taylor. Yeah, so Ford could be one. I'll have to do some research on. Obviously, the Texas winter storms was one. We talked about that last year. I had an outside speaker talk on that one. That was what was amazing to me on that one was when ERCOT, is that it? They had our meeting the Friday before, and he said the winter storm was like 2 seconds of the conversation. It was not a big deal. No one was worried about it. I was like, how could that be? This is their responsibility. He said they've been told many times they needed to winterize those gas plants, and they just didn't want to spend the money. So I asked, well, how much would that have been? And he said, you wouldn't have noticed it in your rates. It would have been a small enough number. It would have just spread out to pennies. You know, those kind of things you kind of wonder, we're placing our entire safety in your hands. You have a responsibility. I sure want you thinking about worst case scenarios. And they knew, I mean, like 2 weeks before, it was, you know, weathermen and weatherwomen, they may not be the best forecasters, but they got that one right. They were telling us a good 2 weeks before, this is going to be a major winter event. And the people responsible for taking care of us thought, oh, no big deal, we won't worry about it. So, you know, it's kind of infuriating. I do want to get someone from the FAA to come and speak to this class. I just don't know how to ask them. So not this class, but a future class, and just see if any of y'all have contacts in that area. Let me know. I'd really love to hear their side of how they approach this.
On the
those guys are really nerdy, so they'll probably be super
Yeah.
excited to.
Yeah, nerdy people are like, no one ever listens to us, and you ask them, yeah, they'll come talk to you. I discovered that at USA, the most quantitative people will talk to you for 5-6 hours in a row, even if they're working overtime. They love talking about their jobs. All right, let's really switch gears and let's get out of operational risk and let's get into pure finance. So what's the key issue on this one? This is a basis risk. This is all about basis risk. So remember what basis risk is. You assume two things are correlated in a certain way, and suddenly they're not. And it shocks you, it surprises you. I talked about that with the USA pension plan. In that case, it worked out in our favor. This is a case where it didn't work out in their favor. And I'm going to call it MG because I can't pronounce this word. Anybody here speak German? Metallgesellschaft. I don't know how to say that word. But anyway, so MG is good enough. This is written by Franklin Edwards. He has some really good articles out there. I don't know if he's still living or not, but he has some really good finance articles. This is one that Dr. Misra sent to me. It's a really good case. It is old. It's an old, very, very old case, but it really highlights some great aspects of finance. So it's just as current today, especially given what's going on with oil prices. So let's walk through the case. I might be able to show you oil prices because I think I have a file that does that. I'll have to look for it. I'm gonna have to show it to you next class. Yeah, but I'll show you because it is important to the case. And the timing of it is very, very important. So MG has an oil trading subsidiary. And they established a very large position in futures and swaps, about 116 million barrels. That's a lot, right? What are oil prices today? I mean, say it's $100. So we're talking pretty significant 16 billion, whatever position here. So pretty large, especially back in 93, although oil prices back then were probably 30 bucks. And so when you do a position in futures and it's a long position, so long, you know how derivatives work, right? So if you have a long position, that means you benefit if the prices go up. If a short position, that means you benefit when prices go down. That's what long. The only time you be really, really careful with treasuries. Some people get confused on treasuries. If you're long treasury futures, what are you hoping is going to happen? Interest rates to fall or rise? Your long treasuries, futures, you want interest rates to fall. Why? Because it's based on the price of the bond, not based on interest rates. So don't get confused like, hey, I think rates are going to rise, I'm going to go buy some long futures. No, you're going the wrong direction. All right. So it's always based on the price of the underlying. Even for interest rate futures, it's based on the price of the bond. So it's a long position. So that means they're hoping prices will rise. And prices didn't rise, they fell. So people say, my word, they took this speculative position, hoping oil prices are going to rise. They fell. How could they be that stupid? That was the surface, and that's what the board thought. The board comes in, a new board comes in, says, wow, how can we have these people just speculating on oil prices? And they brought the company down. But that's not what actually happened. They actually had another side to this. They entered into fixed price delivery. So they're actually going to deliver oil in the future at a fixed price. So if you promise someone you're going to deliver oil in the future at a fixed price, what do you want oil prices to do? Rise or fall? I hope they fall, right? I'm going to give you oil at 30 bucks a barrel, and oil right now is 28 bucks. I hope it falls to 20 so I can go buy it for 20 and deliver it to you at 30. So they had this large contract with fixed delivery where they're going to deliver oil at a fixed price. So essentially this is a forward contract. It's an over-the-counter contract. What I don't understand in this case, and it's not explained anywhere, who these customers are and why they're entering these contracts, and why didn't their customers just go into the futures market? I don't understand that. That to me is really confusing. Maybe these are customers who actually needed the actual oil, but that's what the futures contract does as well. So There's something going on in this case that's not explained very, very well. But we'll just look at it from MG's standpoint. So they promised to deliver 160 million barrels of oil in the future to these customers, and the price has been set up front. That's pretty dangerous, because they're not going to go out and buy 160 million barrels of oil and just have them sit there. That's very expensive to do. So they're going to buy the oil when they deliver it. So they need to somehow hedge that. So the hedge makes sense. So they hedge this price risk by doing what? Buying futures. So they got an exposure that they're going to lose if prices rise. So they go do an exposure where they win if prices rise. But then that means they're going to lose if prices fall on the hedge. The interesting thing was, and this is what I really don't understand, is with this fixed forward contract and hedging it with the futures, the net of all that is they were locking in a $640 million profit. So again, why didn't their customers do this? I mean, aren't their customers losing 640 million? Anybody understand? Anybody want to try to explain this? Doesn't that make sense? If their customers had gone in the futures market, they would have been $640 million better off, or am I missing something? Something's missing in this whole thing to me, but anyway.
They just didn't know how to do it.
Well, in that case, they're kind of taking advantage of the naive, but I don't know how many naive people are buying 160 million barrels of oil. So there's something strange going on here. It might have been in 93, the futures market was different. I mean, you do have to have a certain kind of contract. I mean, you don't just, do a futures contract for 3 barrel oil and they're going to take it to your doorstep at your apartment. You have to have a transportation set up to the hub and all that. That's why you all saw, back in 2020, the futures prices actually went negative. And that's just because there was no place to take the oil. Everything was full. You kind of wish you had that problem today. There was just too much oil everywhere. So who knows what was going on back there. But so far, everything looks really, really good. I mean, that's exactly what you want finance to do. We have these contracts, but we can hedge it. We can lock in a $640 million profit. Who wouldn't do that? Looks like this is a great subsidiary. They probably have, made their targets on income for the next 10 years. What could go wrong? So was this a hedging strategy? Was it speculation? Was it hedging that just had really bad luck? So in 93, a new management team came in. Why? Because this thing blew up. Got to get rid of management, bring in new management. The new management comes in. You would think the first thing they would do is say, let's figure out this transaction. That's not the first thing they did. The first thing they did was get out of those derivatives. Now, what happens when you get out of derivatives? You still have the fixed contracts. So now you're exposing oil prices rising. You would have thought, the logical thing would be to sit down and let's understand this contract. So they didn't do that. That I do know is the case. There are management teams that come in and do the craziest things because they're just everything's knee-jerk reaction. So 93, new management comes in. They say these speculative oil deals have put them in the crisis. They were saying that without actually talking to anyone that has set up this deal. Others hold that the derivatives were part of a complex hedging strategy and would have been effective if the new management had just waited them out and funded the cash calls. We're going to talk about the liquidity issue here. Yeah, so you see the case that's going on. I wish I could show you the actual oil prices. Let me see if I actually put that out there. I remember at the beginning of the semester, I said, I always forget to do this. So I'm going to make sure to do it this time. And let's see if I actually remembered. Looks like I didn't remember. How frustrating. All right, I'll get them for you next class. It is pretty interesting because if you look at actual oil prices, they could not have done this any worse than they had. The new management coming in, they could not have gotten out of these contracts at a worst possible point. So it kind of, if they just waited really even just a few months, a lot of this thing would have just kind of disappeared. All right. So all hedgers take some risk. You saw that with my USA example. You can even see it in the numbers. It wasn't a perfect hedge. Hedging seldom eliminates all the risk. You saw that with the balance sheet immunization. yeah, you're getting rid of interest rate risk, but you're picking up credit risk. You know, there's no perfect hedge. Maybe if you own a Vanguard S&P 500 index fund, and so you sell S&P 500 futures, that's a pretty good hedge. You're going to be essentially taken care of in that case, but it's hard to get exactly that case. It's possible Vanguard's going to mess up on their 500 S&P 500 fund, unlikely. So this is the key. I love this phrase. Hedgers are speculators on the basis. See if you can get that into an interview question. That'd be pretty impressive. You know, so I'm really worried about risk. I think it's important that hedging strategies are developed really well, although hedging is always speculating on the best basis. I mean, they're going to be really impressed, especially if it's human resources. They're not going to know what you said. They're just going to say very smart person is what they're going to write down. It sounds really cool, but it is. If you understand it, it is pretty cool. So hedgers are speculators on the basis, trading a greater price risk for a lesser basis risk. So hopefully the basis risk, I mean, it's there, but it's a much smaller risk than if you didn't hedge. So let's look at the hedging strategy. Some of this, I'm going to show you the actual article itself. So if you go into our Blackboard, I added, oh, I already had it loaded. I added the cases. So here's the actual Frank Edwards article. It's not highlighted because it was in a PDF. It is a good article. I think my summary does a fairly decent job on it. It is a little bit of a lengthy article. He has another article that's much shorter that I didn't put out there for you. One of the things I love most about some of these articles is the actual bibliography. You find that book I gave y'all last semester on the healthcare reform. I almost had to stop looking at the footnotes because I was like, wow, I really need to read that book. I really need to read that article. And I was like, and he had, I don't know, what, 50, 100 pages of bibliography. You could have just done the bibliography. So, so it's some really cool stuff here at the end. But it's a good article. I do recommend you read it. His margin's a little wide there, so it's not as long as it looks. And he is a very good writer. All right, so let's get into the details of this. Their total derivatives position was virtually identical to the forward supply commitment, 60 million barrels. So essentially they had a hedge ratio of 1. So that's one question you have to ask, is the hedge ratio, should it be 1? Now on the pension plan for USAA, I did not perfectly dollar gap it to 0. And my reason for that, I had a good reason not to, is I was worried about interest rates, but also had inflation risk. So I actually shortened the duration somewhat, because if interest rates were rising because inflation was rising, that really could have clobbered me on that pension plan. So my hedge ratio wasn't exactly perfect because I had other noise going on. This article doesn't really go into why the hedge ratio of 1 wasn't the perfect thing. It really has to do with contango and backwardization. So I'm not worried about that. If you want to go out and do a research on contango and backwardation and how it relates to this project, that's fine. I think you can get really frustrated pretty quickly. But they use short dated futures. So that's a pretty big part of this case. You can't go out 10 years on futures, but they had this contract that went out that many years or several years. So they already had a mismatch in time. Now that's not a disaster. You might think, this isn't like you have an asset that 10-year duration and you're borrowing it 3 months. It's not that kind of mismatch. You can hedge a 10-year commitment with a 3-year contract. You just have to, what we call, manage the roll. And there's risk every time it rolls, but it's not massive risk. So it works. I mean, trust me, it does work. We were doing that at USA with our options. You do have some risk at the roll, but you can manage it fairly well as long as you get out ahead of it. But futures even more so. Futures are much easier to manage the roll. Options, there is some issue with options. You can't let options go to expiration. Because if you let them go to expiration, let's say you're hedging a 10% loss, and you go to expiration, and the day expiration, the market falls 9%, and you want to roll, you're not going to be able to roll because the options are going to be way too expensive. So you've got to get out ahead of it to do that. But with futures, you can, because it's a 1-to-1. The market falls 9%, you have enough gain that's going to roll you forward to the next one. But there is risk, and the risk is because of backwardation and contango. Which one's the normal one? Which one sounds normal? I don't know what contango means. But backwardation, I can't even say sometimes I say backwardization, I add an extra IZ in the end of it. So contango and backwardization. So refresh on your futures. So let's say oil is trading for $100 today. What's that called? Today's oil price is $100. You call that the spot price. Futures, let's say 3 months out is whatever. I don't know why Bill Gates says we need that extra space. Do y'all like that extra space? Am I the only one that does it every time I do? Why does he think I want a space between everything I type? All right, so you can buy oil today. If you buy oil today, you're gonna have to store it. What if storage cost is $3? Right, so you buy the oil today, you got to store it, it costs you $3. And then you got TVM, y'all remember what that is? Time value money. If you buy the oil today, you're out of cash today. Right? So if you use a future contract, you don't have to buy it, you don't have to buy it in for 3 months. So you got 3 months of interest. Let's say that's $1. So what should the futures contract be? Any guesses? You could buy it all today for $100. It's going to cost you $4. Or you could wait for 3 months, not have to store it, no time of value money. What should that price be? So in 3 months, you have to pay a price. Is it 104 or 96? You can buy all today for $100. It's going to cost you $4. Or you can buy it. What if it was 96? What would you do? Would you buy it today and store it? Or would you do the futures contract? Future contract's wonderful, isn't it? You're going to pay $96 for oil and you don't have to store it. You don't have to pay. So it's not 96. So what is it? 104. That's called contango. The futures is greater than the spot. That's the normal because you got to store the oil. You got all this cost. So that's normal. So what is backwardation? That's when it's 99 or something like that. Something weird. I mean, 2020, I can't explain to you at all. When the futures price is not lower than the spot price, it's actually negative. That's a little bit different animal. I can't explain to you. So I don't, it was very short term. You know, I should have gone out and bought a lot of futures contracts. I mean, it's kind of fun to buy something and they send you cash. That's always fun. It's like when USA sold Six Flags. We sold Six Flags and we had to pay money to sell Six Flags. That's not a good thing. When you sell something and you have to send them cash, that's never a good sign. That's like when you sell your house, it costs you money because your mortgage is worth more than the house. So this would be too good to be true. Obviously, you wouldn't buy the oil today. Why would you ever do that? You can buy it for 99 bucks in 3 months. So that would be whatever that word is. Let's see if I can get it. Backwardation, is that right? Bill Gates likes it. Why do I do backwardization? Is that a word? No. So, okay. So ignore me when I add the extra syllables. So that's when the spot is greater than the future. So contango should be normal. Now, I don't know commodity markets. That's not my thing. I've seen articles that said backwardization is pretty common. I've seen articles that say it's pretty rare. I'm sure we can Google that and find out. It's just not my area at all. There are a lot of factors behind oil prices right now. So here's, wait, 3 minutes. You can learn everything you need right there. Maybe I'll listen to that on my next bike ride. So that's what you know about futures. Futures, I know a lot of people will say, I've heard students say this, the reason the futures price is $99 is because we think oil prices are going to fall. I think that's absolutely false. If people think oil prices are going to fall in 3 months, guess what happens to oil prices today? They fall today, right? You think there's people out there going, well, I got to buy oil at $100, but I know it's going to fall to 96. No, they'll just wait and buy it at 96. So there is nothing in this that says we think oil prices are going to fall, so that's why the futures price. The futures should be spot price plus, we call it, we call, what do we call these two things? Call it carry. So this is cost of carry. Cost of carry has two components: storage and time value money. Now there are futures, and again, I'm not a futures. I don't know commodities at all. Obviously, there's futures where you can't store. You can't store bananas for 3 months. I mean, you can, but they don't last for long. Or oranges, you might be able to. But perishable items, everything changes. And since I'm not a futures trader, I can't get into that. But oil, you can store oil for 3 months, and it doesn't really deteriorate. It's perfectly fine. And so the math here should work. Now, when backwardization happens, you might say, well, why don't people just set up arbitrage? You can do arbitrage on this, can't you? You can buy the oil today, store it for $4, and then sell the futures contract at 107. You got $3 locked in. That you can do, no problem. But what about this one? How do you arbitrage this one? Can you short actual physical oil today? Can you sell oil you don't own today? You can do that with stocks. You can do that with bonds. But can you sell oil? How do you short stocks? You know how that works? So you want to short Facebook, which would be kind of crazy to do right now. You should have done it 6 months ago. But let's say you short Facebook stock. You don't have any Facebook stock, but you want to sell it. How do you do that? You go to your broker and you sell it. What does your broker do? The broker goes, borrows Facebook stock from somebody else and sends it out, and they don't even know that you just took their stock and got rid of it. If they want it back, they got to get it back pretty fast. Can you do that with oil? Say, hey, I want to sell some oil. I don't own any, but can you get some from my neighbor and deliver that? You can't. It's really tough in physical markets short. What if you think the real estate market's overpriced? Can you short your neighbor's house? It's like, man, his house going for 500. I'm going to sell his house for 500. And I'll buy it back for 3. You just can't do that, right? Because someone wants to move in there. So it's just not possible. So it's very hard to set up an arbitrage in backwardation. You might say, wow, when I arbitrage, it's just, there's not a way to do it. It's really, really tough to do. The other thing with backwardation that this article talks about is there is a tendency for backwardization or contango to exist in certain types of markets, falling markets, rising markets. And that's pretty important to what they're doing here. So they use short-dated futures and swaps. Now, swaps are a very different animal. That's an over-the-counter, much less liquid. So that's a different instrument. But both of these, futures and swaps, require what? They require a margin account. They require cash. What do you think was their margin account on this? They didn't have one. They probably should have had one, but they didn't have one. They didn't demand these people on the fixed contract to send them cash when oil prices fell. So there's a one-way street on this. So they reduce the forward continues to maintain a position, reducing the size of the hedge at each roll to the account for the product delivered to customers that month, maintaining a hedge ratio of 1. So this contract they have is not all one fixed period. They're delivering oil throughout time, and so they have to keep that going. This creates a rollover risk depending on whether markets are in backwardation or in contango. All right, so you kind of set it up. So it seemed pretty easy to begin with, but you see it's a fairly complicated strategy. So this isn't something they can just buy 160 million barrels of futures and just you're done. This is something you have to manage pretty actively. So what went wrong? So it looks like they knew what they're doing. They set it up correctly. They obviously had some really smart people. So what happened? Energy prices tumbled. That's great news for their fixed contracts. Horrible news for their futures contracts. They experienced large losses on their futures and swaps. That's price risk. And they had large margin calls. That's liquidity risk. So you're already seeing a couple things going on here. They had rollover risk. So where does that come into? That's where this kind of You got to understand backwardization, contango. That's really what rollover risk is. And what market are oil prices? Are they backwardation, well, I can't say that word. Backwardation or contango. You have to know that because that's going to influence. I remember the first time I talked to an oil trader, I thought, wow, this is really cool. An oil trader, this is his whole career. So I say, hey, what do you think oil prices are going to do? He said, oh, I have no idea. I was like, what? You're an oil trader. No, his whole job was to play roll risk and backwardation and contango. That was his whole job. That's all he knew. That's pretty shocking, isn't it? That an oil trader, no, I don't know what oil price could do. I haven't paid attention. I said, man, I thought you'd be looking at supply and demand, what Saudi Arabia is doing, all this kind of stuff. No, we just look at roll risk. So it's risk of, there's a typo there, risk of gains or losses when short positions are rolled each period. Using these contracts is probably a better approach than physical storage of the energy, right? Because you have all these costs of storage. Losses on rollover resulted from an unusually long period, although not without precedent of price contango. So they're saying contango, again, I don't know what percentage of time, but they're saying this particular time contango lasted a longer time than normal, leading to larger than expected rollover costs. Now we're not talking, hundreds of millions of dollars here, but it's, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars probably. So they were experiencing some losses because of the roll risk here. So in the period of time they looked at it. So this is a perfect, now this is my addition here. This was a perfect case for value at risk, where they could have sat down and done some modeling and look, they could have actually modeled that roll risk. I had a former student called me this last week, and he had a very similar type of problem. It was with options, not with futures. And my recommendation was, get a stochastic model set up, go buy crystal ball at risk, set up all the parameters, because it's a lot of people say, I want to set up some kind of option pricing model and do that. That's just a really hard thing to do because option pricing models are very unreliable when you're trying to do modeling like this. So actually go out and buy a stochastic model and model that. And I think that's probably what they could have done here. They would have relied heavily on history and try to get a sense of what could happen, and then you even add some noise terms, some error terms, just to see what could be the outsides. So a perfect case for value at risk. They may have done that, and they just didn't have it in the article. Unfortunately, there's also a positive relationship between contango markets and falling energy prices. So they're in this long extended contango and they're losing money in falling markets. So they had this thing set up, but that relationship was there. So contango markets tend to last longer when you have falling prices, and that's when they had their roll losses. See how bad risk could have perfectly showed them that they had more risk on the downside than the upside. So correlation, they weren't thinking about. Funding risk, that's obviously closely related to liquidity risk. So here, I think the issue here was communication. This is something I learned in my job, is you over communicate. So I had on the pension plan, we had something that if interest rates rose, I was going to look like an idiot because I'm going to have all these losses on my swap contract. But if interest rates fell, I was going to make a big gain. I needed to constantly tell people, y'all remember, if rates rise, over and over and over again. USA had really, probably still has very, very smart executives, but they're not finance people. This stuff, I mean, you can imagine what these people are presenting. The people that we're presenting to, it may have made sense when they presented it, but 2 weeks later, it was completely unknown to them. That was my experience at USA. I would present the project to them. They'd say, I would go one by one. We went office to office to every exec council member. Here's what we want to do. Here's what we want to do. They all shaking their head. I understand it. It makes a lot of sense. Let's do this. A month later, I go to the committee to get approved. It's like they've never seen me in their entire life. What are you talking about? We can't do that. That sounds too risky. They're not stupid people. They're very, very smart people, but they have their own jobs. They have their own things. If they're head of human resources, that's what they're worried about. If they're head of marketing, that's what they're worried about. So it's understandable. So you have to keep reminding people, we're hedging. The hedge is going to do this, and this environment is going to do this environment. So every opportunity I had is to remind them. This firm may have made a mistake I made earlier in my career, was I got that approved. I'm never bringing it up again because I don't want them to unapprove it. That's not a good strategy. You just got to constantly keep it in front of them. Fortunately, we had our risk committee, remember our CALM committee, the Corporate Asset Liability Management Committee. And our CEO sat in every committee meeting. I had him every quarter to talk about this stuff. It was wonderful. I had his attention. We would see him a lot even in between that, but I knew every quarter I had him and we could reminder, we're hedging this. This is how it works. It's like, oh yeah, right. I remember that. It didn't always work. I remember one meeting, he was so mad and he goes, who approved this? Who approved this? He was like, he wanted to fire someone. And I had the document with his signature where he approved it. Do you think I went, you approved it? Anybody think I did that? You think I'm that stupid? I know some of y'all think I'm pretty stupid. I'm not that stupid. But yeah, I had his signature. You approved this, sir. So you got to remind management. They have very difficult jobs. They're very torn between a million different things at once. These are very complicated transactions we're doing so constantly. And my guess is they got this approved, got it done, and they said, we'll never talk to them again. And they should have kept reminding them. So the funding risk, I think what they should have done here is gone to their banks and said, hey, we're doing this transaction, and I would have been full disclosure. This is exactly what we're doing. We are going to have some cash calls, but we've got the fixed contracts on the other side, protect us. Don't worry, they should have done that. You can't go to banks and say, hey, we have these big cash calls and management's panicking and there's, that's just too late. You've got to set these things up in advance. It's very similar to, my last, have the infrastructure in place, and then make sure the infrastructure is ready. So you might have set up some letter of credit 3 years ago. And so now you need it. You call and say, okay, can I speak to Maria? Oh, she retired 2 years ago. Oh, well, she did this contract. Oh, we can't find it. We don't know what you're talking about. No, you got to make sure these things are going to actually work. So you have something that's marked to market. How often do they mark these to market? Continuously, every second of the day. So they couldn't borrow against their forward commitments to obtain cash. It was too difficult to look through those and understand them. Terrible matching problem. They had cash requirements on one side and none cash coming in. So I also think, now this is not talked about in the article, I also think they had credit risk. So let's think about it. You got these forward contracts, oil prices fall, you're gonna make a fortune off these people unless what? They go bankrupt. They go bankrupt, they can't pay your forward commitment and you don't have any cash collateral from them. So I think you have credit risk from them. You also have, and I don't have this in there, maybe I should put this in here. What about legal risk? So you got this contract, you're gonna buy oil for 40 bucks and oil just fell to 20 bucks. You think your lawyers might be looking at that contract in detail to try to find something that went wrong, some outs that you can get. But again, if they go insolvent, you have these future contracts, you're set on those aren't going away. But one of your forward commitments goes bankrupt, you're not going to get any money out of them. That's the credit risk. So that's not talked about in the article, but I think that's a huge one, especially without the collateral. You need to have a cash call on these type of commitments. And then disclosure risk. So this is a huge one, disclosure risk. This is a German company that has a German auditor and a US auditor. The accounting for the two is radically different. German accounting is very kind of old school. It was kind of not buying into this fair value accounting the US was into. I'm not saying which is better or which is worse, but German accounting was, if it's in the public markets, you market to market. If it's not public markets, you keep it at book value. That's why I told you, what was that, FAS 150? What did I tell y'all? 126, 157? What was it I told y'all? Don't forget this. This is important. I can't spell it, but is it coming up? FAS. I can't remember which one. Level 1, 2, 3. That's what we want. I don't see the FASB. If y'all see the FASB, tell me. FAS. I don't think it's 115. There it is, 157. All right, so the US has 157. 157, it probably wasn't in place at the time of this article, but still the US was much more open to marking things to market. And 157 sets up those rules. Remember the 3 levels. So where would futures fit? Level 1, 2, or 3? Level 1 has a ready market value. Level 3, no ready market value. So futures go where? Level 1. Even the swaps probably go on level 1. And so where do the forward contracts go? I think they would be level 2. I don't think they're that difficult to value, are they? You have oil prices, it's forward delivery. Those probably wouldn't be that difficult to value. I don't know if they're level 1. They might have been kind of level 1 in the US because you had the contracts, you had oil prices, maybe. Oil prices was definitely a public market. But the US says mark them both to market, which is exactly what MG wanted. Because the fixed contracts had a huge gain, the futures had a big loss, the 2 offset each other, everything was fine. German accounting said, no, you mark the futures to market, but you don't mark the contracts. So what happens is they're losing a fortune with German accounting and everything's perfectly fine in US accounting. Does that make the stockholders feel better? No, it made them feel much worse. And it doesn't help that their US accountant was Arthur Anderson, which at the time wasn't insolvent yet. Who was Arthur Anderson? Who was their famous client? Anybody remember? Yeah, Enron. So this is pre-Enron. So there's some humor when you read these cases and you see Arthur Anderson as the auditor. So just confusion. That's that disclosure risk. You have 2 different sets of books. It's just confusing for the stockholders. So the biggest thing is the basis risk. It's trying to hedge something that's very physical, very illiquid, and hedge it with something that's very liquid. That's just not going to work out well. So then you have the issue of the board not understanding what's going on, and they react too quickly. They just waited a little bit longer. The board just assumed someone had made a mistake, and they just shut the whole thing down. And right after they did that, energy prices came back up. Now, so they took the losses, they cashed out on losses on futures, got out of that, and now they have these major losses on the committed contracts. So they doubled up their losses. So that's why I say communication is so critically important. So don't make the mistake I made is like, they really don't understand what I'm doing, but they're approving it. That happened to me once at USAA. It was a small thing. I wanted them to hire a manager overseas because of the currency risk. I remember in my presentation, Bob Davis goes, does anyone have a clue what he's talking about? And the whole room said no. And then he said, does anyone have any reason not to approve it? And they go no, and they approved it. It's like, that's really weird. But I got my approval. I said, I'm never talking about this again because it's a pretty small thing. But that's usually not a good strategy. You actually want them to understand it because you want them to, when these things happen, you want them to react correctly. You don't want them to shut things down stupidly. All right, that's a pretty cool case. Y'all see what I'm talking about with the essay. All right, so what can't you do for your essay? Will this work? How many think that will work on your essay? Will not work. So what you need to do, so this is a critical thing, and you need to take what I just gave you, and you got to put it into your own words. It's not that hard of an assignment if you pick this one, okay? How many do you have to do? If you choose this one, I already shut it down. So I think you had to pick 2 of the 4 or whatever. I like this case. I think it's a pretty important one for finance to understand. So, all right, I'll stop it there. We can talk about this a little more at the beginning of next class if y'all have comments.